At the bottom of the deepest hole in the world, something is waiting for us. If someone had told me a couple years ago that my obsession with rocks would land me in a Chinese prison, I would have said probably not. But here I am. I used to be your average geologist when I saw the research at a university in Beijing. Was looking for a deep earth specialist for a multi-year project. So of course I signed up right away. Jobs like that are pretty hard to come by in life. So as soon as I was accepted, I started packing immediately. Moving across the world was hard, but I didn't care who was backing my research. I just wanted to work with people who saw the value in my expertise. Well, they saw how important that was, all right? One minute I was studying some weird reports of seismic activity in the northern provinces. Next minute I was surrounded by Chinese special forces. They told me they found proof that I was a spy. One day later I was locked up in some high-security prison cell. I never saw any of this proof, by the way, but I stayed there for a week before they came to me with a deal. That day I was trying to figure out if the damp patch on the wall was getting bigger or if I was losing it. And that's when somebody opened the cell door and walked in. He was dressed in a lab coat, and he looked like he'd rather be anywhere but here right now. Peter. He started, his voice flat. I'm DR. Jean. The government has a proposition for you. Yeah, I asked. Not like I had many options to begin with. Yes, my team has just completed drilling the world's deepest hole, he said, as if he was talking about something as normal as digging a garden pot. It's a significant achievement, he continued. But before we make it public, we need to ensure it's safe for further exploration. And let me guess, you want me to play the guinea pig because I'm expendable? I asked. Well, something like that, he replied. You're a geologist. Who better to assess a geological project? What's in it for me? I asked, though part of me was already buzzing. Scary government prison aside, I always dreamed of exploring some place no one had ever been. A reduced sentence and a position in a government research team. If you succeed and survive, of course, he replied. Survive? How they really knew how to sell a dream, but he was right. This sounded like a job for someone like me. I had the skills, the passion, and the motivation to get the hell out of here. All right, I'm in. I said, when do we start? Good, we start tomorrow. Get some rest, he said. And he turned away and walked out as quickly as he'd arrived. I stayed awake that night and couldn't sleep. I was going to go deeper into the earth than anyone else had ever been before. This was real exploration, you know. It felt terrifying. But at the same time, I was excited. They transferred me to a facility near the excavation site the next day. It was there that I met the other two guys who were a part of my team. It seemed they each had their own reasons for agreeing to this suicide mission. We were given a brief rundown by a team of scientists who looked at us more like lab rats than people. The depth, the pressure, potential gas pockets, unstable rock formations. There was a lot to take in. I asked Dr. Zhang the one thing they didn't mention in the briefing as we were gearing up. So just how deep is this hole? I asked. The deepest, he said as he checked his clipboard. That's all he would say, and it didn't help me feel any better. We approached the pit from where I was standing. All I could see, there was a massive open gap in the earth. I looked over the edge, and it felt like staring into a pool of nothing. I heard deep rumbling sounds coming from the darkness. It felt more like we were going to get swallowed up by some monster. The techs around me snapped the last bit of equipment in place. This was it. I was about to go to a place that no light had ever touched. I was scared, but part of me couldn't wait to see what was down there. I wanted to see something new and learn more about the planet we called home. We would be going down in a team of 3. Jean explained that this was to limit casualties. Our instructions were clear. Use code names. No personal chit-chat. Just focus on the job. This was serious business, not a time to make friends. Alpha was our muscle and an ex-soldier. He was a big and quiet man that carried all our stuff. Beta, yeah, I know, was a skinny engineer who never stopped frowning. He was always busy checking our equipment to make sure everything was working. We had supplies to last a week. Good luck, man. This is for all of humanity. Remember that. Make us proud, Okay, dear, Zhang said as he smiled at us. And with that, we began our descent into the world's deepest hole. Our radio connection to the surface got weaker the deeper we got. It died soon enough, and we were on our own. We were equipped with body cams and sensors that would be recording everything we saw or did down there. We were surrounded by nothing but rock and darkness. As we went down, it felt like dropping into hell. A caged metal elevator carried us down. Thick ropes connected us to a series of pulleys operated by the guys upstairs. They seemed to hold our weight pretty well, but I still couldn't help but wince every time they creaked. Our only source of light were our headlamps. I felt more and more isolated the deeper we got. The earth above us felt heavy. The light from our headlamps barely reached the walls around us. This place felt old and untouched. It was clear that this wasn't a place for humans, and I couldn't shake this feeling that we were trespassing somehow. The ride down felt like it lasted forever. Hours passed as we went deeper and deeper. The air got colder, and the only sounds were the scrape of rock against metal. We all felt uneasy. It was like the earth itself didn't want us there. I reached out and touched the wall of the hole. It was rough and snagged my gloves. The surface was cold and slightly damp, like it was sweating. I felt slight tremors as I touched it. They were subtle, but they were there. It almost felt like the ground was breathing, like the hole was alive. We all felt it, but nobody said a word. We finally reached the bottom after what felt like years underground. The elevator stopped, and we walked out to hot air blowing around us. I knew it was from the geothermal vents surrounding the place. I walked around as the other two began offloading our supplies. The cave was dark and dusty, so much so that I made little smoke clouds as I walked. And then I found it, an opening. It wasn't big, but it was definitely a natural cave entrance. The edges were smoother than the drilled rock of the shaft, worn away by time and water. I called the others over. "Looks like we found something," I said. We all looked at the cave entrance. We couldn't see anything beyond the glow from our headlamps and decided that there was no use just standing around. Curiosity was getting the better of us, despite the unease. We geared up and prepared to enter the cave system. The tremors became more noticeable the deeper we got into the cave. They weren't strong enough to make us turn back, but there was a strange regularity to them. It was as if they were following a strange pattern. I didn't remember reading anything about this. In all my years of research, it made me wonder what kind of natural phenomenon could cause such a thing as we walked deeper into the cave. I noticed something glowing in the distance. It was a faint blue light, but I couldn't see much due to our headlamps. I asked the others if we could turn them off for a second, and they agreed. In a flick of a switch, we turned our lights off and found the source of the glow. Spread across the entire cave was a glowing blue fungus, the soft blue light coming from it. It was strangely magical. They formed a path down the tunnel, illuminating the sprawling cave system beyond us. I was busy admiring the fungus up close when a sudden movement startled me. I whipped my head around to see a strange creature near a pool of water. It looked humanoid, but it was unlike any person I'd ever seen. It was thin, with sagging, pale skin. Its arms were so long that they dragged across the floor. I saw it bend over water and cup its hands to drink. The hands were alarmingly human-like. Its bony fingers joined together as it brought water to its cracked lips. And that's what shocked me the most about the creature. How much that action looked human intelligent. Without thinking, I took a step towards the creature. But it must have heard me, because before I could do anything, it hissed at me and ran off. I tried to tell Alpha and Beta about what I saw, but I couldn't get their full attention. We just stumbled into another obstacle. It was an ancient mechanical lock attached to a large stone door. It looked like it hadn't been touched in centuries. The lock itself was a complex network of gears and levers. There were symbols around the lock that had been carved into the stone, but I couldn't tell if they were instructions or warnings. Scattered around were piles of bones. Some were clearly animal bones, small, delicate ribs and skulls. But there were human remains too. Several skulls sat at the base of the door. Everything was illuminated by that same blue glow that covered the cave walls. It seemed to glow brighter here. I knelt down to better examine the lock. I wanted to see if I could open it, or at least understand the mechanism better. But then we heard it. A soft shuffling noise in the distance, and along with it, sharp hissing noises that almost sounded like some sort of language. They echoed through the cave walls, getting closer. I spun around and I saw what was making these noises. Humanoid creatures poured out of the tunnel in a swarm. They were packed tight like a wave of flesh. I could see now that they didn't have eyes. Instead, they had long, narrow slits on their faces that sniffed at the air and mouths full of razor-sharp teeth. The creatures moved by pulling themselves along the tunnel floor. They'd sniff the air, and their hissing grew louder and more aggressive as they shuffled closer. We started to panic. Beta and I tried to work out how to unlock the door, but the mechanism was full of complicated levers and gears. Meanwhile, Alpha stood between us and the creatures. He had his gun out. He tried to keep it steady, but I could see even his hands were shaking. The lock was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was glowing with the same blue fungus that lit up the cave. It looked almost alive. The creatures were getting closer. I could hear their raspy breathing echo throughout the tunnel. Alpha yelled at us to hurry up. I could hear his voice tremble. Beta continued to fiddle with the lock. I could see him moving the gears around, and then suddenly, one of the creatures jumped at Alpha. Its long snake-like arms reached out for his throat. He fired his gun, and he hit the creature square on the chest. A spray of that glowing blue sludge erupted from the creature. The loud bang echoed down the tunnels, but that only seemed to bring more of them. Soon the creatures swarmed from every direction. They poured out of the tunnels and dropped from the roof. Their bodies twisted and writhed as they crowded towards us. The ones at the front of the pack were only a few feet from Alpha. Now he fired off a warning shot when the door started to move. Beta had finally figured out the lock. Inch by inch, the giant door creaked open. Without wasting a second, Beta shoved me through. Alpha fired round after round, trying to hold back the flood of creatures. He shouted at Beta to move his ass behind him. I could hear the machine gun and the creatures hissing. Beta quickly crawled through the gap in the door from the other side. I turned back just in time to see a creature reach Alpha. It grabbed him by the throat and pulled. Alpha choked and stumbled, but with a final burst of strength, he aimed his gun at the lock and fired. One of the creatures was trying to crawl through the opening, but as Alpha hit the lock, the door slammed shut. The creature was torn in two, spraying the wall with that glowing blue slime. It twitched for a second before finally dying. As Beta and I leaned against the cold stone wall, catching our breath, the sounds from the other side of the door filled me with dread, hissing, screaming, and the unmistakable sound of gunfire. And then abruptly it all stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse in that moment. A deep sadness washed over me. Me and Alpha. We hadn't known each other well, but he'd sacrificed his life so that we could escape. I don't know what the hell he did to land him a spot on this suicide mission, but at that moment it didn't matter. I put a hand on the door, thanking him. As I scanned our surroundings, it became clear that the walls here were smeared with the same glowing blue substance. That told me a couple things. One, that there's more of these monsters here, and two, that there must be other passages that they're using to move around, and that means that there must be some other way out of here. So our best bet of getting out will be to follow the glowing blue sludge. I talked to Beta about the glowing stuff and possible hidden passages. He nodded, agreeing with me, then we continued down the tunnel. As we walked, we noticed carvings on the walls. They were intricate and ancient, with swirling patterns and strange symbols that looked like an ancient language. There were carvings of human figures too, but with unusually long arms that spiraled. And then one scene showed these figures surrounding a massive tower. These look familiar, Beta said, looking closely at the carvings. I've seen something like this before in some caves in the Middle East. Wait, what do you mean? I asked. He kept his flashlight on the carvings. My wife was an archaeologist, he began. We were a research team, and I followed her to every dig and cave. I always said I'd follow her to the ends of the world, if only she knew. But then she got really sick, and that's why I'm here. The Chinese government offered me a deal to join this expedition. In exchange, they promised to take care of her, no matter what happens to me, he said. As Beta and I went deeper into the tunnel, the walls seemed to throb with more of the glowing blue. It was as if the tunnel itself was alive. The further we went, the stronger the tremors became. They shook the ground beneath our feet with a persistent rumble. Eventually, the narrow tunnel widened into a massive cavern. As Beta and I stepped into the cavern, we noticed a massive rock formation. It towered above us. It looked as high as a skyscraper, and the more I looked, the more I saw that this tower wasn't just a single block of stone. It was made up of multiple towers, each stretching high into the darkness of the cavern, and the whole thing was covered in that glowing blue slime. The formation had huge holes in it, each one big enough to drive a truck through from these giant openings. More of those long-armed humanoid creatures kept coming out. The cavern walls were full of openings and tunnels where the creatures moved in and out freely. The tremors here were stronger than anywhere else had been. Each one felt like it shook the Earth's foundation after a very strong tremor. I noticed that the shaking seemed to come from within the rock itself. Hot steam burst from openings, clouding the air and filling the cavern with a hissing sound as the walls vibrated. We chose a tunnel that seemed less active than the others. It was as good a choice as any to get out of here. We moved carefully, ducking from one boulder to the next. As we made our way deeper, suddenly the formation shuddered again. It was a deep rumble that echoed through the cavern, and it shook the floor we were standing on. I peeked through an opening, and I saw what was hiding under the rock formation. It was a huge, fleshy creature. It was covered in the glowing blue slime. Each time the creature shuddered, huge black orbs squeezed out of those holes. As I watched, I realized what I was looking at. It was a nest. And that thing under the rock formation, it was like its queen, the mother that would keep giving birth to more and more of these things. As we watched, more shiny black orbs tumbled out of the queen. They spilled out and rolled across the cavern floor. One of them rolled right to where we were. Beta quickly moved forward and knelt down beside the orb. He explained that part of his mission was to collect a biological sample from these creatures. He and his wife had found similar orbs all over the world during their archaeological digs, but the ones they'd found were old and fossilized. The government wanted him to collect a fresher sample. I did not think this was a good idea, but carefully Beta pulled out a small toolkit and began to scrape at the orb. He caught tiny black flakes in his test tube. He was gentle, trying not to puncture the egg. But as Beta collected the sample, the orb started to put out this awful smell. It reminded me of rotten eggs. It filled the air, making it hard to breathe without gagging. I looked around and I saw whatever it was. It was attracting those long-armed creatures. They sniffed the air and hissed as they moved closer. Before I could warn Beta, one of them jumped at him from the shadows. It moved with terrifying speed. Its long snake-like arms reached out. It grabbed him around the waist, pulling him to the ground with incredible force. The creature started dragging him away towards one of the larger tunnels. "Take the sample." Beta yelled at me as he struggled against the creature's grip. "Get it to the surface." I took the small container, and I wanted to help him. Beta was fighting back hard. He reached for a large rock, trying to hit the creature to break free. But then more creatures came. The second one violently twisted, and it tore his arm off. Blood spurted everywhere, and he screamed. The creatures weren't just randomly attacking. They were working together and reacting to us. They were smart. I wanted to help him, but within seconds there were dozens of them on him. The creatures hissed, and I could hear Beta's screams behind me as I ran. A sharp metallic scent filled the air. It was blood. Confused, I realized I'd circled back to the tunnel where Alpha had made his last stand. I looked around, but I saw no signs of the body, just blood. But I didn't have time to think about that. I could hear the creatures hissing and chasing me from behind. I kept on running, trying my best to remember where the cave entrance was. Finally, I reached the open area where we'd arrived. I ran straight for the middle platform that had taken us down into this nightmare. The platform had a hand-operated lever that was my ticket back up. I grabbed it and I started cranking as fast as I could below me. I could hear the sounds of the creatures coming out of the tunnel. Their hisses and screams got louder. When I looked down, I saw a mass of pale, twisted bodies spilling out into the open. They rushed towards the platform, but I was already moving up. They formed a giant moving mass of flesh right beneath me. They stretched their arms towards me, and they tried to pull me back down. I cranked the lever faster, taking quick breaks before forcing myself to continue. Each time I paused, the sounds of the creatures grew even louder. A few minutes went by, and ever so slowly, the sounds began to fade away. After what seemed like forever, the platform finally started moving on its own. I realized the surface team must have noticed I was coming up. I was so relieved that I collapsed right there. As the platform reached the surface, the sunlight was blinding. Dear Zhang and the rest of the research team were waiting for me. I was sweaty, dirty, and I looked terrified. But he didn't care about any of that, and he reached out for the container. "Did you get it?" were his first words to me. I nodded, handing over the sample. He asked if I'd recorded data. Yeah, it's all here," I said, pointing to the gear strapped to my back. It had recorded everything we'd gone through. Dear Zhang seemed relieved. Even pleased, "This is a much better result than the Russian expedition," he said as he examined the sample closer. "Governments all over the world have tried to see what's down there. But all previous attempts have failed," he said. I was too tired to fully process his words, but they hinted at a larger, more complex operation than I'd realized. Dear Zhang looked back at me, and for a moment he hesitated before saying, "Peter, considering what you've been through and the success of your retrieval, I'd like to offer you a spot as a permanent researcher with us." The offer took me by surprise. Part of me wanted nothing more than to walk away and never think about the creatures or the caves down there ever again. But the part of me that was a scientist wanted nothing more than to study this. "Just think about it, Dr. Zhang added. You're the first person to see what's down there and survive. That makes you the world's leading expert, and we could use someone with your experience. I am packed and ready to leave, so I've got some time to write all this down." Grandpa's talking with the 2 trucks that just pulled up, still waiting on the last one. Then we're headed north. For now, I've got time to kill. I always meant to do this, and it's officially now or possibly never. Fair warning. This is a long one, folks. 8 pages. Buckle up. And if anyone in East Texas wants to tag along, message me. We're taking as many people as we can get. This was the 3rd night in a row they were unhinged in the tree line, and my room at the end of the double-wide trailer put me right beside their ceaseless barking. I peered to the left as my thumb unlocked the iPhone screen on the nightstand. 1:30 a.m. I thought about how I'd ask my dad about kindling them on the porch. Knowing he'd give me some excuse about them being necessary for our home, the first line of defense, our protectors, our alarm system. Looking back, we should have realized it then. To their credit, Daisy and Rose excelled at their duty. All manner of interloper received a billowing cascade of howls and barks on our property. I thought how scared a single raccoon, possum, or coyote must have felt when the sisters barreled into the tree line at them, shattering the peace of night. The echoes that trailed through the woods gave every impression there were more than 2 guards. None stayed to find out. They often startled me awake when the pair flew off the porch in an eruption of sound. My room filled one corner of the trailer, pointing east towards our driveway. The forest a dozen yards beyond my uncle and cousin's hand built the pine porch that I unfortunately shared a wall with. I had no bed frame, my mattress on the floor next to the stubby short nightstand. Over the years, I'd learned the pattern of footsteps both inside our trailer and the outside porch. I could feel them, the heavy boot-clad stomps of my father, the dainty steps of my little sister, the multiple light paws. As the girls returned from driving off a would-be invader, I could identify everyone by their steps. The dog's normal process was broken these last few nights. Normally, once an intruder was identified, one of them would sound off. The second would answer the call, affirming backup. Together, they would drive with speed and resonant fury towards the enemy. They charged the trees. The interloper fled. The night returned to peace. We never had more than 1 incident per night, though it was always jarring when it occurred. This was different. For 3 nights straight, Daisy and Rose came alive with activity. As soon as the evening dusk gave way to full darkness, they slept during the day now. Not naps, deep, full sleep to regain their strength from the prior patrol. Then, together, they prowled the edge of the Blackwoods. Low growls and occasional half-grunts ran the full duration of the night. More than once, they would erupt in blistering, synchronized anger, but eventually return to their tense surveillance. There were no more one-off encounters, ending with a blitzkrieg of ferocious intimidation. It was hourly now, consistent. Whatever they drove off kept coming back. I rolled onto my back and stared at the lightly luminescent sticky stars on the ceiling. My baby sister and I found a bag of them at the local dollar store, and my father always melted under the combined pressure of his kids. We initially agreed to split the bag between our rooms, but after putting half up in mine, she insisted we needed them all to make a real night sky. She slept in my room for a week straight after that, together looking at our tapestry of glimmering plastic, our own little universe. I stared at them as the barking pushed farther away, me silently hoping they'd continue into the distance for the remainder of the late hours so I could get some sleep. This is where my life changed forever. At first, I thought my exhausted mind played a trick. Reminiscing about building galaxies with my sister that pulled me away from reality, and the sharp, distant yelp brought me back. I sat up in my bed, held my breath, ears perked. The still far barking became high-pitched, strained, desperate. It was coming closer, and most noticeably, it was alone. At 15, I was probably too old to still wear the pajamas my aunt had got me for Christmas, but they were just too comfy. Clothed feet slid into loose flip-flops as I stood to make my way to the door. There was no doubt in the second yelp, followed by a hyper-stuttered half-bark, half-squeal. Much closer than before, practically in our driveway. It strained, struggled, then ended abruptly. For the first time in 3 nights, I finally got what I wanted, and it filled me with dread. Silence. I opened my door the same time my little sister opened hers. Her 10-year-old frame peeked nervously around the edge of her white door across from mine, eyeing me over the small gap that separated our rooms and led to the kitchen. Before either of us could step under the 5 feet long, 4 feet wide landing of carpet that separated us, my father's shadow burst into the kitchen, shotgun in hand. "Stay in your rooms." "Lock the doors," he commanded mid-stride. My mother's smaller frame quickly waddled behind him in a purple nightgown. He hit the front door with force. My room rattled as the wood slammed against the outer wall. I felt his steps quickly descend the 5 porch stairs and vanish into the drive. The glow from the now lit overhead porch light illuminated a single yellow square from the front door's window. The light stretched down onto the linoleum to my right, just past the dining table, and landed next to the little gap between our rooms. Mom's shadow appeared in it a moment later, and I heard every lock we had latched beneath her worried fingers. "Mommy?" my little sister asked with a child's innocence. Neither of us moved from our respective door cracks. Mom rounded the corner. Hurried fingers fumbled with her phone. "It's okay, Melissa. It's going to be okay," she said. She lied. It's hard to describe that square of light on the kitchen floor next to me. How it's burned into my memory. The front door was just around the corner from my room. It'd be easy to take 2 rights and walk straight outside to see the situation with my own eyes, to no longer linger in that tense confusion. I would not be able to see anything from the only window in my room, which faced us on the long side of the trailer. Curiosity began to get the better of me, but I stayed. Mom walked into my sister's room, attempted to comfort her and guide her back to sleep. As the oldest, I received no such consideration, though I stood there a long while as if expecting it. I could see their shadows moving inside. Melissa's room could hear their worried whispering. My heart sank when I felt the first step of the porch bend downward. The thought of it being my father vanished. As the weight warped and popped the boards underneath its mess, my breathing halted again, but this time not by choice. Instinct froze me in place, paralyzed everything. The second, heavy footstep cracked the 3rd board, completely skipped the 2nd. I stared at that golden square of light next to me. Anticipation and fear grew in equal amounts. The 5th porch step protested next. The boards buckled and twisted beneath monstrous weight. The contrast is what haunts me the most, I think. The shadows of my loving mom and sweet sister in a darkened, half-lit gloom across from my door. The hairy black shape that grew into the yellow square, shining on the kitchen floor. I could see both, practically one in each eye. Comfort and love, unknown and horror. Things I cherished and things I feared. Even from the silhouette, I could tell the hair was coarse and all-encompassing. A large cone-shaped head rose from wide shoulders. I couldn't tell if it had a neck. Not much taller than my father, yet horrifyingly heavier. It faced through the window, unable to see any of us from the unlit kitchen and around the sharp corner. Luckily, we turned on no other lights, but I wasn't sure if it could hear their muffled conversation. As quiet as it was, I found some courage at that, slowly opened my door wider, prepared to sneak over to them and lock ourselves inside Melissa's room together. I heard a guttural, low growl, and somehow, I knew it was annoying. It turned to its side, looked up. The shadow of its face was long, too long. What looked like large eyebrows fell into a flat nose and a jaw that extended well down to its chest. I couldn't see the rows of teeth therein, but I knew they were there. I couldn't think of a single animal with a large oval-shaped head like that. Not even a mythical one. With the twin sounds of a small grunt and glass breaking, the light from the porch vanished. The kitchen plunged back into near-complete darkness, taking the yellow square with it. I heard my mom and sister pause, finally aware something was out there. If they tried to look now, they would see them. I had to prevent that. My foot lightly touched the carpeted space between our doors. The entire trailer shook with a violent impact and a deafening, primitive roar. The front door slid past on the kitchen floor, buckled into the center, and nearly split in half. Hinges, locks, glass, and splinters flew like insects. They ricocheted and clattered off every surface. Hanging lights and closed blinds swung. As the entire trailer rocked on its foundation, instantly I moved, without thought, without choice. Somehow I knew this was my one chance, a desperate and reactionary motion, to use this momentary chaos to mask my actions, a storm of sound to cover my own. I grasped my sister's door handle and slammed it shut, instantly retreated into my own room in the same motion, and slammed mine as well. Only then did I register the massive, bloody footprint on the crumpled front door. I sat on the floor back against the plain wooden door that would not save me. My breathing became a ragged mess, shallow and still too noisy, even with both hands latched over my mouth. My head was dizzy, ears thumped from the hefty dose of adrenaline, my brain flushed into every corner of my body. Yet even then, the only clear thought that repeated in my mind was a desperate plea for my mother and sister not to scream. That thought shattered as a new material twisted and cried nearby. Linoleum, a single titanic foot crushed glass and tile underneath. Heavy, deep sniffs filled the kitchen with more curiosity than anger. Maybe we'd be lucky, and the hungry nose would lead it to the pantry near the front. Maybe it would leave after gorging itself on potatoes, bread, and apple cinnamon toast crunch. I waited. Cool beads of sweat formed on my skin, back still pressed against the bedroom door, to their credit. My mother and sister could have vanished for all the sound they made. The second step bent the floor again as it fully entered our home. I considered running then. This was my best chance. I glanced at the trophies on the shelf, some toppled from the earlier impact, most earned as the starter for the track and field relay race team, with a few from various cross-country meets. I was fast, surely faster than that huge thing. If I went now, I'd be within arm's reach of it only briefly. But the element of surprise was on my side. I could run straight through the trailer and head out the back door in the laundry room. I didn't know the layout inside. Another advantage. This was the best time to lead it away. Then I could surely outrun that massive monster once I got outside, right? My budding confidence exploded in the same manner the dining table did. It slammed against the kitchen cabinets like a comet, shattering countertops, drawers, and itself in the process. It had taken both my father and uncle to move that heavy oak table up the porch steps and through the door. 2 men moved it. And this thing, just the muffled sound from my sister's room, might as well have been a signal flare. The monster paused. It's like me. Held perfectly still, the single accidental sob of a frightened 10-year-old girl ended as fast as it came, but was noticed. I, my trophy rack, now considered which would be best to stab an eye or wedge down an open throat. Even in my terror, if it went for my family, I would go down fighting to protect them. My hands glistened with sweat. The greenish light that my fake galaxy above reflected from them filled me with a faux bravery, a misplaced confidence to fight monsters with no training, no ability, and most importantly, no actual weapon. I need to improvise. Fast. It was so fast. The monster moved with a speed unbefitting its weight. With two massive strides, it was between our doors. This time, the feet were quiet, impossibly quiet. It didn't keep the momentum through their door. Instead, it paused on a small carpeted gap. I felt it lower itself, squatted into a crouch. Its breathing was heavy, invasive. Horrible nostrils pulled at the air between us, and it waited, quiet, patient. Again, I realized the only thing between me and it was an inch of hollow wood. My lungs halted completely when it rushed, but the rancid smell of its oily hide entered my nose anyway. My eyes watered. Small tears formed the corners. Dear God, please. It was huddled right behind me. I stared at my short nightstand and my phone. It seemed miles away. All my confidence, all my internal bravado gone. Someone save me. Please, God, don't let us be torn apart by this monster. I considered crawling for the phone, but I knew I could never do so without alerting it. I could picture that long face on the other side of my door, crouched low with matted hair, atop powerful meat, layers of primal muscle coiled into piles of potential violence, waiting for one of its victims to lose their composure. I wondered if I felt pleasure in that. Headlights pierced the edges of my south-facing window blinds, the sound of parting gravel heralded the approach of a large vehicle. Uncle Rick's Silverado had to be. He only lived a mile up the road. That's right. My mother had her phone with her. My cousin James was on leave from the military. He'd be with him for sure. The sensation of relief rose in me. Briefly. I knew when it noticed, though. Its long breaths paused with realization. I felt its massive weight turn, still crouched next to me. Its bulk brushed against my door, hinges strained as it pushed inward against my back. That almost broke me. It stayed there, still low and waiting. It had to know I was there. It had to. Its breathing resumed, now much lighter and nasally, but still long. I planted my palms slowly and silently into the carpet with one of its inhales, trying to mask my movement. I rooted my trembling limbs to the floor, trying to prevent them from shaking the wood behind me. God, we were leaning against the same door now. 3 distinct slams echoed outside, an extra person I didn't expect. Good. A mumbled conversation grew ever closer. Sudden terror gripped me as they approached the porch. I realized it was waiting. I had to warn them. I had to tell them it was in here. But how? My heart raced with a surety they were walking into an ambush. A horrifying awareness dawned on me then. Knowledge of the beast intelligence. Knowledge that only I possessed. Knowledge that more of my family walked into danger. I could scream, but it would kill me before any help could make it to them. I could run, try to jump through the window. It would take the monster a few moments to realize, and I would be able to warn my uncle outside. But if the glass didn't break, it would be through the door and rip me to shreds before anyone even got inside. I could sneak for the phone, the monster paying more attention to the men approaching now. But that was an assumption, dangerous one, considering it continued to lean against the same door I did. The voices paused outside. The monster's breath matched. Silent moments passed. Then the first boot hit the wooden step. It apprehensively approached the darkened, shattered door frame on a porch. It was horrifying how lightweight that boot was. 2 others ascended behind the first, 3 men in total. I could picture the raised rifles in front of scanning eyes, unsure if there was even a threat left, wondering if it was a bear or a mountain lion, none of them dreaming of the monstrously strong beast awaiting them inside, ready to strike. I was running out of time. They were all going to die. We were all going to die. The first steps made it to the doorframe. Uncle Rick's voice whispered, "Holy shit," his boot crunched the shattered glass as he entered our kitchen, cautiously. The monster took a deep, quiet inhale, lungs filled with fuel to slaughter my family. Chills ran down my back in waves. Coldness gripped all my organs, every pulse filled with ice. Tears ran freezing trails down my cheeks. My teeth gritted in frustration. I looked up at the stars. My sister and I made my choice. I screamed. Looking back, I think I wanted to say words, but they were panicked and flighty. I just remember my voice felt like a volcano in the Arctic. A rush of heat exploded out in defiance of the cold, embracing every inch of me. A piercing, agonized screech of utter and complete fear birthed into the night air. The monster met my scream with a bellow of its own. It's ironic how some emotions permeate every language, even in nature. The staggered whale was not angry as its plan was foiled, nor was it joyful at one of its victims finally losing their composure during the hunt. It roared in pure, unadulterated shock. A hole appeared next to my head a second later. An explosion of splinters and anger entered my dim green galaxy. Large, gray fingers uncoiled from the fist they were a moment before, claws black and dirty, slick with blood still. Red, mangy hair covered the back of the hand and the entire forearm. The monstrous palm opened and swung inward towards my head. My entire body hit the ground in a curled ball. There were no more plans. There was nothing else I could do. I cast the die now. I did all I could. Two of its fingers found purchase in the loose fabric of my pajamas. Panic racked my everything as they curled into a grip. I pressed my back to the bottom of the door. Screamed again. This time I was answered by a gunshot. Most people only know guns from movies. You see the hero shooting his pistol in a stairwell, or a tight corridor, or submarine. Then they have conversations with these. Guns are not quiet. The first blast inside the trailer rattled my skull and replaced most of the sounds with a constant ringing. Though even that consistent monotone chime didn't overtake the pained screech of the monster as its back hit my sister's door. Though my hearing was hampered and I dared not look through that hole, I could piece together some of what happened from the vibrations communicated through the trailer's floor. Mumbled shouts, more boots. The kitchen is filled with challengers. The monster charged. Its gait is too large, too fast. It was on them. Gunshots pierced the ringing. It made it worse. The floor trembled with collisions en masse. The wall beside me rattled with an impact. A weight thudded to the floor. It scampered and rose returned to the fight. Dishes and glass shattered. Cabinets warped. The chairs broke, as did bones. Gunshots gave way to fevered screams and anguished roars. I hope my warning had saved someone. Anyone. Please say it helped. My trembling increased as the brawl ended. Newly gifted tinnitus masked the victor, and the floor had become depressingly silent. The only vibration was an odd random shake. That paused in irrational intervals. I rose slowly to peer through the hole in my door. What little I could see of the kitchen was destroyed. Nearly every inch slicked in bright blood. The metallic tinge overwhelmed my nostrils. A large bloody splotch adorned the ceiling, red handprints on each side, one tan work boot laid on the counter, with two jagged, splintered bones still in it. Cabinets hung from the wall or were missing entirely, and a destroyed stool lay in a heap on the stovetop. A mangy red form rose from the other side of the small island, coarse, ragged hair now matted in blood. It faced away from me, twisted and jerked. A horrifying rip pierced the ringing in my ears. The monster dropped something heavy on the kitchen floor. It landed with a flat, permanent thump. It stood to its full height slowly, and I could see its long gray jaw move as it chewed. Yet it seemed to wobble, reeled slightly for the first time of the night. Its footing felt unsure as it turned back towards me. I ducked in realization, a promise from before, a vendetta not finished. It had won, and now it was time for revenge on the small creature that started it, that ruined its crafty ambush, and was to blame for every bit of damage and pain it felt now. Panic overtook me, sobbing tears, now a constant fight to keep silent. It was going to kill me. I was sure it was going to eat me. The massive foot landed with wetness, blood so thick on the kitchen floor I could actually feel it. A second less sure step landed after that, but to my surprise, it was headed towards the front door. It staggered, planted full weight behind each exhausted step. One footfall crunched a glass near the doorway. Then, heavy knees collapsed down into the tile. It held there a moment, then toppled forward, shaking the outer porch with the bulk of its torso landing with no resistance. Half inside, half outside, its ragged breaths large enough to vibrate through the floor now. Then, stillness. I waited. Out of fear, shock, disbelief, my mind raced as the weight of loss finally caught up to it. My dad, uncle, cousin. This wasn't supposed to happen to people, to entire families. After a minute, I found my resolve as my irrational mind regained control. I crawled to my phone on the nightstand. I palmed it in sweaty, quivering hands. My back leaned against the wall, the porch steps just on the other side. Waited for it to rise, to continue its rampage. But it didn't. A sob brewed as I looked at the family photo on my phone's background. Typed the password in a pained wetness, blurred the numbers. Exhaustion and anguish finally breaking the levee that held them this long. I can't describe the feeling when that solid, heavy foot crunched into the second porch step. Oh God. My hands moved in a blur, the message clear and direct. I confirmed its sent. Quietly, I prayed Mom would see it fast. The new monstrous feet climbed the stairs and paused in front of the first beast in our doorway. Impossibly, another set ascended after that. Two more. My screen lit up then, a message from Mom. Where are you? Before I could type, twin roars rattled the wall I leaned against. Primal, guttural, yet somehow more human. They continued for a solid minute. Each paused only briefly, but never at the same time. Eventually, they faded back into silence. My ears returned to a single, constant ring. Maybe they descended into quieted grunts I was unable to hear. Maybe even tears. The weight of the dead one lifted with terrifying ease, and the two creatures descended the steps of the porch, and back into the night. It was finally over. Mom and I texted back and forth. I told her to call 911, and I'd stay put and warn her if those things came back. Even though I couldn't hear much, I could feel, and I was too close to this wall to risk calling for help myself. I couldn't hear well enough to speak with a dispatcher anyway. She texted me back that she'd reached several family members, and the police were already on the way. Looking back, she made the right choice. If she'd panicked and called herself, we'd all be dead. A half hour went by before I had the courage to move to Melissa's room. I was finally sure they were gone. My mom sobbed uncontrollably as she hugged me tighter than she ever had. I told her and my sister to not go out there. They didn't need to see any of that. Neither protested. Even traversing the tiny gap between our rooms scarred my heart forever. James's body was crumpled against the end of the island, one arm missing at the shoulder, both orbital sockets replaced with a long horizontal gash. His bottom jaw hung by one joint. I didn't see my uncle or whoever the third person was. I didn't want to. I didn't want to go look for my dad or Daisy or Rose. I shut the door to the carnage, retreated in with my mom and sister, crouched in the corner with them. Fear, grief, and injustice felt in silence for so long, finally received voices. We bawled and huddled anguish, the pain of living, the guilt of surviving. We wept in victorious misery. It's been 1 year. 3 things happened after that night. My baby sister lives with family in Seattle. My mother hasn't been sober since, and I've spent every day at Grandpa Murphy's, my father's father, a retired sheriff, military vet, and self-proclaimed gun nut. He's taught me everything about him. Shooting, cleaning, sighting, calibrating. He got me a Remington 20-gauge shotgun for my 16th birthday. I'm ready to put it to use. I suppose you want to know the count. Everyone does. Dad was dead. I didn't hear how didn't care to. My Uncle Ricky, my cousin James, and one of his military friends. I feel bad I forgot his name. All closed casket funerals. All heroes I never got to thank. Braving something monstrous and violent while I hid away. Worthless and pathetic, laying in a ball as they died. Every single night, I hear it breathing next to me. Every single night, I get to relive the screams, hear them die, feel them die. I lay there every time, doing nothing. Maybe something as simple as grabbing its leg would have saved one of them. Maybe stabbing it with a relay race trophy could have saved them all. Well, I'll never be helpless again. I dropped out of school after that. They had me on several medications I've stopped taking. They took my edge off. They made me dull. I've been training with Grandpa. Even in retirement, he's maintained his fitness. Still able to march up and down mountains on his bi-monthly hunting excursions. I've been joining him all. We've practiced with rifles, small arms, close quarter fighting, and several months of Krav Maga. The last one is more for fitness and good for a young man to know, Grandpa says. He always apologizes to me, says he wishes he would have been there. I do too, but he shouldn't feel that guilt. It wasn't his fault. There was a triple homicide somewhere east of Livingston. Being an ex-sheriff has its perks, Grandpa said to Pakawai. That's code for we will be moving a lot. It's finally time. My preparation is about to pay off. I'm taking my two favorite pistols, my Sauer P320 and my Desert Eagle. I named them Daisy and Rose. Fitting, ironic, poetic. Call it whatever you want. This all started with Daisy and Rose barking in the night. And it's going to end that way, too. When's the last time you looked at someone? I really looked at someone. Maybe you'll meet someone with one eye that droops slightly, or with an ear that looks a little off. But that's normal, right? But what if you look closer and you find teeth that are too sharp and eyes with no pupils or a face that looks more like a Halloween mask? I lost my job recently, and I decided to start renting out parts of my house. There was enough room upstairs for at least a couple of college kids. There was a basement big enough for a few more. It was just this large one-room space that basically covered the entire underside of the building, supported by these thick concrete beams. But I figured it wouldn't hurt to try as long as I was honest about what to expect. So I put on an ad on a couple of socials. I included a few pictures and I hoped for the best. The price was cheap too. Cheaper than it should be, I guess. It was early October when I had a knock at the door. I rushed to open it. I was still browsing job openings on my phone and chewing on some cold pizza from last night. It's hard to explain how surprised I was to see what I saw. Now, most other applicants had either been young guys or college girls. What was now standing in front of me was a family of four, a mother, a father, both in their mid-40s, I think, and two young boys. The mom had this autumn-colored cotton dress with a little ribbon. The dad had this fancy black overcoat, a white shirt, and a red tie. Both kids were dressed up in identical blue shirts. The dad stepped forward, offering me a handshake. I accepted. "Hi there," he said with a warm smile. "We're the Walters. We're here about the ad." "Oh, hi," I answered. "Might get a bit crowded, but you're free to have a look." "Sorry about that," I gestured to myself, but the dad just shook his head. "Oh, not at all. I hope we're not imposing," he said. I invited them inside, and they went right past the stairs. I figured they just missed it. "Excuse me," I said. "It's right up here." I pointed at the stairs. "Oh, we know," smiled the mom. "We're here about the basement, so there's this long wooden staircase that spirals into the basement. It's one of the main reasons I don't like going down there or furnishing the place. That spiral makes it almost impossible to bring down any proper furniture. It is infuriating, but all four members of this picture-perfect family stepped down, all composed. They were courteous and respectful, with just the polite amount of excitement. But I got the sense that there was just something off about him. The dad brought up some measuring tape and started checking the walls. They asked me about the lack of windows, the air quality, their ability to bring down some furniture, and put up some light fixtures. I agreed to all of it. I still couldn't believe they were actually considering it. This was clearly not a space meant for a family of four, and they gave the impression that they were pretty well off. There was no reason for them to rent a space like this. Still, as they finished their questions, the mother approached me. "Would you mind stepping upstairs and just walking around a bit?" she asked. "We'd like to see how much sound carries through." A strange way to ask for soundproofing, I thought, but I did as she asked. I got up the stairs, put on my heaviest boots, and just wandered around for a bit. After a couple of minutes, I turned the corner, only to see all four of them just standing in the hallway, picture perfect. all with a big smile on their faces. "We're very pleased," the mother said. "We'll take it." They signed a 6-month rent agreement, and I got to know them a little better over the next few weeks as they sporadically dropped by. There was Layla, the mother, Anders, the father. The kids were Eden and Alvin. Apparently, they were in between housing and wanted something small and cheap in the meantime. Despite all that, I couldn't shake the feeling that a basement was a strange choice for them. Still, I needed the money, and they were eager to get it done. They even offered to pay a little extra since they were bringing in more people than I'd anticipated. About a week later, they showed up for the official move-in. Layla and Anders insisted on bringing everything in themselves, and I shouldn't be bothered with any heavy lifting. Apparently, just letting them stay, there was good enough. They brought in about a dozen pieces of furniture covered in blue tarp, along with a ton of cardboard boxes, none of them marked. They also put down several hand-woven carpets, the kind you'd see in a large mansion. Layla was a stay-at-home mom, while Anders worked as some kind of security manager for a nearby airport. He worked odd hours, anything from 12-hour shifts to all-nighters and everything in between. He was also on call for most hours of the day. Sometimes he even had to leave with short notice. It was strange, though. One might think a person like that would need some place with good cell coverage. But that basement, it barely had a single bar. There was Wi-Fi, but it was spotty at best. For some reason, none of this seemed to bother him. That first week living with the Walters, it wasn't a problem. Most of the time I forgot they were even there. I only saw them leave the basement maybe a handful of times, and they didn't make any noise. At most I could hear them stomping up or down that creaky old staircase, but that was mostly Anders heading to work. In fact, I never saw Aiden and Alvin leave for school. I figured they were being homeschooled. Still, they were hardly an issue. I was still working hard on finding someone to rent the upstairs, but no luck. I considered lowering the price, but after the Walters moved in, money was becoming less of an issue. Anders even suggested that I apply for a job at the airport. He knew one of the HR people looking for hires. Having been jobless for 5 months, I was willing to try pretty much anything. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't telling me the whole story. I kept coming back to one thought: what the hell were they even doing down there? Once I decided to get a better look at what they'd done with the place. At that point, I hadn't even seen how they decorated it. It was in the middle of the afternoon, and I had no idea whether they were even down there or not. Their car was gone from the driveway. I knocked a couple of times, and when there was no response, I used my key to get down. As I turned the corner, it was deathly quiet and completely dark. I turned on the lights. They all slept in these basic single beds, all spaced out along the easternmost wall. They had a small love seat couch. A couple of basic plastic chairs faced a thick old TV against the wall. There was an empty bookshelf and a couple of scattered carpets along the floor. I could see a few open boxes. There was a bathroom next to the staircase, but it looked unused. No toothbrushes or anything. It took me a few moments to realize that I wasn't alone. The entire family was standing in a line along the southernmost wall, furthest away from the staircase. They were standing in order of size from tallest to smallest, remaining perfectly still, just looking at me. It wasn't until they noticed me looking at them that they even reacted. They all looked up at me, putting on a friendly smile. "Can we help you?" asked Layla. "I hope we didn't make too much noise," continued Anders. The kids just nodded in unison. I took a good look at them, but I couldn't figure out what I was looking at. I had no explanation for their behavior. "Sorry, I was just going to check the water pressure." I lied. I tried knocking. "Oh, that's all right," smiled Anders. "Go right ahead." Walking back up the stairs, a thought hit me. If they were all down there, where was their car? Who'd taken it? I had a number of strange interactions with him over the next couple of weeks, for example. I once found Aiden, the younger of the two brothers, standing in the kitchen. He wasn't doing anything in particular, just standing there, staring at the spice rack. When I asked him about it, he just said he wasn't doing anything. After a while, he turned on his heel and ran back downstairs. I didn't see it, but I heard his little feet thump all the way down the staircase. Another time I saw Layla standing in the open doorway leading to the basement. She was just standing there, hand on the doorknob, looking right at me. I said hello and she said it right back, but she wouldn't let me out of her sight. When I finally passed from her view, I could hear her running back downstairs, not just hurrying, running. Another time I saw Anders in the car out in the driveway. I saw him from the upstairs window. He was just sitting there, hands on the steering wheel. He was there for a good 15 minutes. No radio or nothing. Just him alone in his car. But the strangest interaction. It came one night when I was going to the kitchen to get a soda. I spotted Layla standing in the kitchen. The fridge was wide open. I could see her silhouette illuminated by the fridge bulb. Her long black hair was wet from a fresh shower. She was in a hastily tied bathrobe, and her feet were bare. At first, I didn't see anything strange. She was just standing there. She wasn't getting anything. It was more like she was bathing in the light. I thought about calling out to her, but something about her, it made me want to just go back into my bedroom. And then I saw it. There was something wrong with her ear. Her left ear was about 3 inches higher up than her right one. Her scalp seemed slightly tilted, and there was something about the way she moved her fingers that didn't look natural. They pointed in different directions, like her hand was fractured. I just stayed there for a while, looking at her from a distance. I watched her shoulders rise and fall as she took deep breaths, like she was inhaling the cold. When she turned my way, I only saw her for a moment. Her torso moved first before her legs followed like a stilted claymation puppet. I managed to slip around a corner, and I heard her rush back towards the basement. Her feet tapped against the hallway carpet in an uneven rhythm. When she got to the door, she stopped. I was leaning against the wall, listening from the other room. I heard her step around for a bit, and then I heard a snap. It sounded like a popping limb, something finding its way back into a socket. Her steps then became more even as she hurried downstairs. I just stayed there for a while, trying to keep calm. For all intents and purposes, I might have just been seeing her in a weird light. It was dark and I was sleepy, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something very wrong with her, that I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. From that day forward, I got more suspicious. I didn't go into the hallway at night, and I did my best to avoid that basement door altogether. I tried my best to just put him out of my head. I went back to focus on getting a job and a second tenant for the upstairs space, both of which proved to be a challenge. But I was making progress. The TSA was hiring, for example. Not the most glamorous job, but it would be solid work finally. A couple of college students came by to check the upstairs floor, a young couple who needed a place to stay while they finished up their master's degree. They seemed like nice enough people, and we got along just fine. They knew the place wasn't the prettiest, but it was a neat short-term solution while they finished up the upcoming semester. The only problem was the Walters family. I remember knocking on the basement door to introduce them. The young couple were standing behind me. Alvin, the oldest of the brothers, chimed in with a cheerful come in. As we went downstairs, the family of 4 was standing in a picture-perfect 2-by-2 formation. Mom and Dad in the back, 2 kids in the front, all dressed in their Sunday best. A freshly printed smile across their faces. The whole scene was insane. It looked like some kind of commercial from the 1950s. "Hello," giggled Layla. "Aren't they the most handsome couple, Anders?" "They sure are, Layla," Anders answered back, polite as ever. For the first 20 seconds or so, this very uncomfortable silence grew between us. The Walters just stood there, smiling, waiting for some kind of response. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't help but to feel that I was missing something obvious. Was Layla's eye color a bit different? Was Alvin's face a bit lopsided? Was Anders missing a finger, or did he just stand in a weird angle? Maybe they'd been strange all along. Maybe it was only now that I was seeing it. When we finally parted ways, I followed the young couple outside. They both turned to me, their faces grim. One of them just stuttered, but the other managed to form a few words. They wanted to know about the blue box in the basement. They said they saw it move. The discussion died down after that, and they said their goodbyes. I got the feeling that they wouldn't be coming back anytime soon. Still, their words lingered in the back of my head. A box that moved. Really? How did I miss that? I decided to finally get some answers. I had to take a little risk and figure this out once and for all. So one day I slipped a note under the door. It said that I needed to clear out the basement for one afternoon while a plumber did some repairs. I looked up a few plumbing things on Wikipedia and referenced a real company. I tried to make it look all official and stuff. Later that day, Layla and Anders dropped by. They were holding hands and told me that they'd be sure to be out for the day. Maybe we'll go to the zoo, smiled Anders. Don't you have work? I asked. Oh, it comes and goes. He laughed. We're very fortunate. Very fortunate. Agreed, Layla. So very fortunate. At the designated time, the family was out of the building. They went for a drive in Andrew's car. They promised they'd be back soon. I told them it wouldn't take the plumber more than an hour. They seemed a little suspicious when they hadn't seen the actual plumber show up yet. Finally, I just straight up lied. I gave them a fake name and asked whether they wanted to call him. Layla didn't call my bluff, luckily, but as they pulled out of the driveway, I was sweating. I didn't even know what I was so scared of, but my mind kept returning to that night when I saw her just standing in front of the fridge. I had no idea what they were hiding or what they might do if I found out about it. There was a part of me that just wanted to get into my car and drive away. Another part of me told me I was being an idiot. When they finally drove away, I wasted no time. I ran downstairs, turned on the light, and I started to go through their stuff. Yes, it was an invasion of privacy, probably illegal, but if I ever wanted to sleep again, I had to have an idea about why they were so damn weird. There were a lot of weird things about their space. All their beds were perfectly made, like no one had ever slept in them. Most of the couches and surfaces were covered in dust. I could tell the TV hadn't been on in forever. It wasn't even plugged in. There were no phones, no chargers, no laptops or computers. Just a bunch of boxes and unused furniture. I did find a Polaroid camera, though. It was at least 30 years old, I think. I started checking their boxes. Just clothes, it seemed. All variations of what I'd already seen them wear. Identical sets of shirts, pants, dresses, and shoes. At least 4 boxes worth. One box was just full of accessories like earrings, necklaces, glasses, hairspray, and fake nails. Another was full of decorations and knickknacks, porcelain dogs, family photos, dried blue sunflowers and roses. I took my time, carefully placing everything back in the way I found it. It was weird, but there's nothing incriminating or downright unnatural. Still, I remember what that couple had said about a box that week. I couldn't see anything like it. That is, until I turned to leave. Right by the side of the stairs, next to the unused bathroom, was a large blue styrofoam cooler. It was the kind of thing that blended into the background, like it had always been there. Still, I could clearly remember not owning one of those things. It looked old and torn, like it had been around for years. And maybe I was imagining things, but it looked like it was moving, pulsing. Something was pressing against the surface, making little plastic squeals. There was a sound coming from it, like a low guttural growl pushed through a thin pipe, a sharp, rhythmic noise. It made the cooler rattle and shake ever so slightly. I froze. I was hoping it would quiet down. I held my breath, and I waited for it to settle. I slowly went back up the stairs. As I rounded the corner and lost sight of the cooler, I heard the styrofoam cover pop off. The sounds became clearer. I heard a loud growl shifting in pitch from high to low, like a singer doing some kind of sick vocal warm-up. And then something hit the floor with a painful yelp, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I tried to figure out what it was. It was like a cross between a dog and some kind of fox. A sharp, screeching tone, and then it scrambled to its feet. I could hear claws scratching the floor, and then something started coming my way. Fast. There was something primal in me that told me to run. I ran up the stairs. I only looked back for a quick look as I shut the door behind me. I only saw it for a moment, something black with a single eye looking back at me. Its skin was tight and misplaced across the skull. There were teeth pointing in all directions. In seemingly random sizes, black drool dripped off a long, elongated tongue. It was a thing wearing the cheap suit of a black dog. As I slammed the door shut, I could hear a car pull up the driveway. It had been less than 30 minutes, I thought. Maybe they'd planned to catch me in the act. I heard them come in and head straight for the basement. Meanwhile, I was in the other room. I was packing a small bag with a change of clothes and a toothbrush. The moment I heard the basement door shut, I headed for my car. As soon as I got in, I saw them step out of the house. They all stood there in a driveway, just looking at me. And right next to them was a beautiful black Labrador, happily wagging its tail. I didn't say a word. I just drove. I had to get away and figure out what the hell I even wanted to do. I wanted to go to the police, but there was no way to explain what I'd seen. What could they even do? Kick them out for having a dog? There was a clause in the rental agreement that let them have a pet. I had nothing. I decided to spend the night at a motel just out of town. I needed time to think and sleep without having the threat of something strange living under me. I couldn't get that image out of my head. The little thing in the dog suit. Like something trying to remember what a dog looked and sounded like. I checked in at the motel and got a room on the first floor. I crawled into bed, put the TV on, and surfed a bit on my phone. I could feel myself relaxing for the first time in weeks, but every time I thought about that house and that family, I could feel my pulse go faster. I remember a tap on the door. I must have dozed off. I hadn't turned the TV off or brushed my teeth. I just woke up with this sour feeling in my stomach that something was terribly wrong. I closed the curtain so I couldn't see who it was. My thoughts were raised, but I tried to think of more rational possibilities. Maybe it was just housekeeping or a concern manager. And then the knock came again, this time with a voice. It was Alvin Walters saying they just want to talk. I didn't answer for a few seconds. I carefully stepped out of my bed. I tried my best to not make any noise. There was no way they didn't know I was in there. They knew. And they wanted something. And whatever it was, I did not want to find out. I snuck over to the back of the room as the doorknob started to rattle. I could hear Alvin again telling me to just open the door. This time his voice sounded like the monstrous growl of an adult man. I pulled open the curtains to a window facing the back of the building. I figured I could climb out there, but as soon as those curtains opened, my heart skipped a beat. Right there was Anders, the father himself, just inches from the window, standing straight with his neatly tucked shirt. A smile was cemented on his face. He tapped the window. "Would you mind opening up?" he asked. "It won't take long." Again, I looked a little closer, and again I could see little details that were just off, a slight droop of the lip that hadn't been there the day before. One I pulled lower than the other. I think his hairline was more forward than usual, like he'd rushed himself to look like a person. There was another knock at the door, another knock at the window. Voices from the front and the back. Hell, maybe even the room next door. Little voices. Big voices. Broken voices. I had to make a break for it. I pulled the front curtains aside to see how many of them were waiting up front, and all 5 of them were standing there. Mom, Dad, kids, and dog. I looked at Anders through the back window. I was trying to convince myself I wasn't insane. There were 2 dads, and none of them looked right. Further down the street in their car, I spotted 2 more kids identical to Aiden and Alvin, both looking like they weren't fully formed yet. A loose jaw, a strange eye. One of them had a wide bald spot. I saw another Layla stepping out of the motel manager's office. This one had a deflated arm and a paralyzed face. I was surrounded. I held out my phone like a weapon. "I'm calling the police," I said. "Get the hell away from me." "That'd be inconvenient," said Anders. The doorknob rattled again, more forceful this time. I could feel my pulse rising, my breath growing short. I looked back and forth, seeing Meanders at the back window, trying to figure out the lock. Only now did I see that one of his fingers was nothing but bone. "How about a trade?" suggested Layla. "Something for everyone." "What the hell are you talking about?" I said, backing into a corner. Go inside that bathroom of yours, grab a piece of tissue and chew on it, then drop it out the window. Layla's voice was as calm as ever. What? I asked. I couldn't understand what I was hearing. It's like the words were there, but didn't make any sense. We're going to need a new suit, said Layla. You will do it. You're not wearing me, I spat back. Oh, we'll leave you alone, and you'll leave us alone, Layla continued. Because if you don't, people that look like you are going to start doing some terrible things. So that way we can all walk away. You'll never see us again. And we'll leave you be. I tried to wrap my head around it. They were going to make a suit out of me, like they'd done with that dog and with that family. There would be someone looking like me, walking around out there or something mild. But what choice did I have? I stepped into the bathroom, and I chewed up a piece of tissue. I spat it out and moved to the window. The family stepped back. I clicked the window open, and I flung the piece of tissue out with a flick of a finger. Layla picked it up and met my eyes. With one clench of the fist, she grabbed the top of her head and pulled. Her entire face lurched backwards. Her lower lip slid all the way to her eyebrows. Underneath was just this black sludge. It covered a deformed skull. She was like a walking oil spill. She pushed the piece of tissue inside herself before pulling her face back down. It took her a few seconds to realign. She just couldn't get it to look right. She coughed a little. She waited. She nodded. And when she looked back at me, she did so with my own eyes. She spoke with my own tongue. Thank you, I heard myself say. I think this will work out for all of us, don't you? I couldn't answer. I couldn't think. I just closed the curtains and scrambled backwards. I heard a car pull around. I heard rustling in the bushes out back, and from afar I could hear my own voice a final time. We'll be gone by morning, it said, but we're never far away. I heard a car drive off, and I just stood there. The next morning, they were gone. The basement was empty. They even left a thank you note. Attached to it was a Polaroid picture of a happy family. A mom, a dad, 2 kids, and a funny uncle, one that looked exactly like me. Are they watching me? How many suits do they have? I wanted to just put this behind me and pretend it never happened, but it's getting harder and harder. Every now and then I see someone that looks vaguely like them and Anders with a different haircut. A Layla that's slightly younger. School photos with Aiden or Alvin, but a different hair color. And a few weeks ago, I got a call from a friend mentioning how they'd seen me in the local newspaper. Only thing is, I've never been in it. I considered moving somewhere far, far away. But first, I just need to get this out. I need someone to believe me. The real me. And not the me you might see in the papers. Most people who've ever worked in night shifts will tell you it's creepy work. You walk up and down the corridors of wherever you are, your instincts working overtime, setting your mind on edge. We're hardwired to fear the night, a time of helplessness, a time in which we slide down the food chain, our bodies craving rest, our senses ill-equipped to cope with the dark. For me, it's never been an issue. To be honest, I kind of like it. The dark. When I do my rounds, I don't feel that fear. I just feel peace. When I walk the halls at night, I don't have to deal with people rushing around or jabbering nonsense. No extra responsibilities or requests. No small talk. No empty pleasantries. Just the echoing of my own feet on the linoleum bouncing off the walls. The soft sound of the patients breathing as I pass their rooms. Sure, every now and then, one of them wakes up in a panic. Pretty rare, but it happens now and then. All I gotta do then is call the on-duty nurse and whoever it is takes care of it. I glide on, finish my rounds, back to the front desk, back to my books. Some of the chattier nurses complain as I pass their station about being stuck on the night shift. They ask me how I can possibly stand it. Don't I get bored? Don't I get sick of being tired throughout the next day? I tell them it doesn't bother me. I like the quiet. What I don't tell them is that it's the daytime that feels pointless to me. I don't have friends to require daylight to spend time with. I don't have a girlfriend who needs attention. Mom died when I was little. Dad has a new family. Just leave me and I don't mind. You don't miss what you've never had. I guess I'm what you might call a loner. I think the nurses pick up on it. They don't often try to speak to me. The nice ones flash me a smile when they see me. The assholes ignore me. All the same to me, to be honest. I always figured they probably wouldn't think much of me if they got to know me anyway. All in all, it's not a bad place to work. Easy money. Not much security required watching over a bunch of old folks on their way out. There's nothing here really worth stealing. No drugs. No expensive equipment. The patients aren't even in a state to get out of bed, let alone cause any trouble worth talking about. At least that's what I thought. The first time in 15 years of work I'd ever felt afraid in the hospice was when they wheeled in Isaiah Muldoon. Now, before I saw Muldoon, I'd seen some disturbing stuff. Dementia patients talking to the walls. Old men with cancer, riddled brains moaning like ghouls. Elderly ladies so emaciated you could shine a flashlight through their stomachs and see the spine on the other side. None of that had an effect on me. That motionless old man on his gurney had. He was so still. The only way I could tell he was breathing was the machine whirring beside him, with the eyes wide open, staring out into oblivion in horror as if they'd seen the end of it all. Pretty rare I saw the patients coming in, and I guess the nurse thought I was the sensitive type. She caught me staring at him, so she leaned over and told me he had locked-in syndrome. I asked her what that was, all the while compelled to stare at the man pinned to the bed. She said he'd been in for a routine operation, and they got the dosage on his meds wrong, poisoned him. His brainstem and the lower part of his brain were severely damaged, the upper part untouched. Essentially, Muldoon was in a waking coma as she told me this. His eyes began darting around the room like ping-pong balls locked onto mine as they took him past. I tried to avert my gaze, but I couldn't break his glare. It was like he was staring straight into me, to places no one had ever seen. They got him into the bay and drew the curtain. I snapped out of it. It took me a moment to get my thoughts back together. Just imagine that for a moment. One day you're healthy and happy, living your life as if nothing can ever go wrong. Then someone flips a switch and you find yourself trapped inside your own body, mine still sharp as it is right now. Only you're unable to move, unable to speak, so damaged even your lungs need help to work, but still completely aware of everything going on around you. No hope of ever being free. Waiting to die. Despite my fear, I couldn't help feeling for the guy. It's one thing to have your mind eaten away by the confusion of dementia. It's another to watch your body decay around you whilst you feel like you're still together. I asked about Muldoon, his family, and friends. The nurses told me his wife had died earlier in the year. No kids. He'd moved to the area recently and didn't even have an emergency contact. The only reason he had enough for the room was his insurance, which was paid for by some organization. Looking back, I guess my first mistake was feeling some kind of kinship with him. He didn't have anyone, just like I didn't have anyone. Plus, with him being in his state, I knew I wouldn't have to make small talk with him or listen to any yammering. So I figured, what could it hurt if I went into his room and talked to him when I was passing? It felt kind of strange talking to anyone like that, opening a conversation. I wasn't used to it. At first I spoke about the weather, sports, the news, instantly despising myself each time I felt myself drifting into petty conversation, aborting and cursing myself as I continued my rounds. But every time I passed, he was there waiting. A captive audience, if you will. I started talking to him about the books I was reading. I'm a big Murakami fan, so I told him that. Described the plot of the novel I was reading by the author. Told him what I thought of it and what I thought was going to happen. I keep him up to date each night I passed and soon got on to more personal topics. I told Muldoon about my family, how my dad was distant and my mom was dead, how no one really liked me, but that I didn't mind. I told him about my life and my dream to one day write a novel. How I slept alone and ate alone. How I really had no one. All the while, during these conversations, Muldoon would fix me with his stare. It was hypnotic. I felt like I was pouring myself into him, a trickle opening into a torrent, until he would release me and I could go back to my rounds. Those conversations, if you can really call them, that always left me feeling so tired, dazed, like I just awoken from a deep sleep partway through. Each time I told myself that was the last time. Yet the next night, when I was passing that room, I couldn't help but go inside, drain some more of myself away. The night Muldoon spoke was the last night I felt peace. I was doing the mid-shift rounds at about 3 a.m. as usual. I remember how quiet the building was as I walked. Thinking back, I don't even recall my shoes making a sound as they hit the floor. It felt like the forest, when everything went utterly silent. How only in the absence of that sound are you aware it was there at all? I drifted to Muldoon's moonlit room and inside. He was sitting up in his bed, bolt upright, his eyes fixed on mine, so wide they could have popped from his skull, brilliant white, against the darkness around him. He was skinny by then, and as I went forward, he reached out his skeletal hands, beseeching me forward. It felt wrong, but I wasn't afraid. I felt like a child being carried to a bed in a fever, tumbling away from myself and towards the blackness, his jaw unhinged and creaked open. With each pump of the ventilator, he rasped out a language that sounded like death gasps. I loaded my head to him like cattle, and he clamped onto it with unknown power. I felt his claws dig into the skin, my skull shuddering as he forced his way inside. The nurse slapped me across the face, and I came around to her petrified eyes searching mine. I was standing in the doorway of Muldoon's room, rooted to the spot. With a wavering voice, the nurse asked me what was wrong. She told me I'd been screaming. Terror erupted through me. I blurted out Muldoon's name, repeated it again and again and again. Aghast, I pointed into the darkened room, to where my attacker was surely scuttling. The nurse flipped on the light switch, and there he was, asleep in his bed, the ventilator gently clicking by his side. I said I didn't understand. He'd attacked me. His hands. The nurse checked the machinery surrounding the withered old man, told me that all looked normal. Nothing had changed. I didn't believe it, but I couldn't bring myself to enter the room. I told her we had to check the CCTV footage. Each room was fitted with a camera. Some of the other patients were stirring. A couple had made their way into the hall, no doubt disturbed by my apparent scream. The nurse said she needed to tend to them and set about her duty. I made it for the security desk. The bank of monitors glowed before me like mystic windows to the past. I squinted at them, trying to focus my blurred vision. My thoughts still felt groggy, as if I'd woken up still drunk from the night before. Not that I drank much, that's just how it felt. I managed to align my vision for long enough to key in the correct camera. My heart lurched as the sleeping old man manifested on the screen. I rewound the footage until I saw myself and the nurse in the doorway. Keep going. As the timestamp sped backwards, the static version of me remained pinned to the spot in the doorway, staring into the room like some kind of jittery creep. By the time I saw myself reverse away from the room, 12 minutes of video had passed. The attack had felt over in a flash, thoughts fogging over again. I pressed play and watched myself stroll up to the doorway and pull up to look inside. Then I just stood there, barely moving a muscle, but not looking especially strange. Just standing there, taking note of the old man on the bed. At the 11-minute, 34-second mark, the man on the screen burst into life, nearly shocking me off my chair. He just started screaming, face contorted, unlike I'd ever seen myself before. The nurse came into view, and I paused the tape. It felt so real, but it was impossible. Had I had an aneurysm? Was there a tumor the size of a golf ball in my brain fixing to send me into one of these beds I've been walking past for all these years? Nausea crept up my throat, and I closed my eyes tight. Should probably get one of these doctors to take a look at me tomorrow, I figured. As the acid receded back down my esophagus, and the urge to vomit passed, my head began to clear. I decided to check the other camera, the one looking into the room. I flipped over to the correct channel, and the old man in the bed appeared on screen, rewound to the time I'd arrived at his room. Hit play. Instantly, it hit me. The eyes, glowing in the night, fixed wide on the doorway where I stood out of shot. A shiver crept down my spine as I watched Muldoon, unmoving in that blackness, his eyes never blinking. The timestamp showed I'd started screaming. The eyes flicked closed. I spent the rest of my shift sitting at the security desk. My thoughts felt cloudy, distant. All I wanted was to go home and sleep. The first light of dawn came. My shift ended without further incident. I made the automatic commute back to my apartment, climbed the stairs, collapsed into bed, and shut my eyes in the hopes that a good rest was all I needed to shake off the strangeness of last night as I drifted off. It all felt like a half-remembered dream, or like something that had happened to someone else at some other time. Tendrils reached out from the depths and dragged me into sleep. My eyes flicked open. I was laying in a bed, which wasn't my own, in a strange room. I felt uncomfortable, but somehow numb. I glanced around, trying to get my bearings. There was the rhythmic sound of machinery beside my head. The place was utterly still, gray, thin cobwebs hanging about the place. A layer of filth covered everything, making the modern furniture look ancient. I attempted to sit up to get a better look, but my muscles wouldn't obey. I willed movement with all my might, but nothing, not even a twitch. I was pinned under some great weight, unable to muster so much as a wiggle of my toe. I realized where I was. It was his bed, Muldoon's. But why was I here? I already finished my shift. I left. I was asleep at home. Relief washed over me at my revelation. I was asleep. Just a bizarre dream. I lay in the dusty hospice bed, convincing myself I'd wake up at any moment in my home. I never had a lucid dream before, had no idea a dream could feel so real. But why hadn't I woken up? Usually when the dreamer notices he's in a dream, his brain shorts out and he wakes. I was still there in what felt like real time. Something was in the hall. My body filled with dread. In the absence of all other sensation, it became my world. I lay with eyes fixed to the closed door. It was out there, moving towards me. It made no sound, but I could feel it. The pressure in the room increased as it approached, like the room had slipped off the side of the Mariana Trench, drifting down into the blackest parts of the ocean. My eyes felt as though they'd burst from my head. I closed them tight to squeeze them back into my skull. It was at the door, waiting. My heart pounded in my chest, shaking my whole body. I knew if whatever was came in and looked into my eyes, it would ruin me. The door opened. I gasped and threw myself off the bed. I kept my eyes closed tight and raised my hands to protect my head from the beam. No attack came. Slowly, I opened my eyes and looked around. It was my apartment. No cobwebs, no machinery, no presence creeping up the hall. Before I could quite register the nausea, vomit exploded from my mouth onto the floor. I rose to get a towel to clean up the mess, but my legs went a mush and I collapsed. My entire body felt stiff, like I'd just run a marathon. I must have come down with a pretty nasty illness. Flu, probably. I wrenched myself from the floor and staggered into the living room where I'd left my phone. It struck me as strange that I was naked. I usually sleep in pajamas, but that was the least of my worries. It was 6 p.m., 1 hour before my shift was to begin. I was starting to feel better, but decided I should probably take the night off. The hospice is pretty strict about coming to work if you have something like the flu. Too many high-risk patients. My boss was understanding and told me to see a doctor if my symptoms persisted. I told her I would and hung up, slumped onto the couch. A knock at the door stopped me from drifting off. I groaned. No one ever visited me, so it couldn't be anything important. The person knocked again, polite and cheery. I made my way to the peephole and looked out. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Patton. We'd never said so much as a hello in the hallway before. I only knew her name from the mail that sometimes mistakenly ended up in my box. What could she possibly want? She looked well enough. I decided against the interaction and was turning to go back to the couch when something slid through the door. A note. If she had some kind of problem, she could get lost. Now is not the time. I opened the folded paper anyway. Dear Thomas, thank you so much for helping me today. It's heartening to know I have such a lovely young man for a neighbor. I baked some cookies as thanks. You'll find them on your doorstep. If you ever need anything, you feel free to pop over the hallway and knock on my door. Thanks again, and God bless. Pamela. Great, I thought. Not only is the woman across the hall losing her marbles, but now I'm involved in her delusions. Should steer clear of her as best I can. That kind of crazy has a way of sucking people in. I spent the rest of the day feeling totally worn out. Though to be honest, it didn't change how I spent the day compared to most of my other days off. I lounge around the apartment, too tired for video games, watching the same series on Netflix I'd already seen countless times before. I tried to force myself to write a little of my latest novel idea, but as usual, I couldn't find the willpower and just went to the fridge instead. Frozen pizza for dinner again. Spaced out. I barely even noticed as my consciousness started to drift, lulled off gently. By the chatter of fake lovers on the TV, I closed my eyes just for a moment. I batted my eyes open. Must have dozed off. The room was dark around me, but smelled dank, rotten. Gradually, my vision adjusted to the gloom. My heart sank. I was back in a hospice bed, pinned to it by my own body. The room had changed. Black mold covered everything, seething out from behind the furniture and up the walls. Air thick with spores was pumped into my feeble lungs with each click of the machine beside me. I wanted to cough to clear my throat, but even that was impossible. I tried to wrench myself from the dream, to will myself out of it, but I couldn't. The machine's clicks intensified. My heart pounded with a quickening rhythm. It was coming. The spores in the air whirled around me with each step outside in the hall. I could hear it now. Each step, the thump of some great mass slamming into the ground. The pressure in the room was unbearable, enough to buckle the door in its frame. Its curdling breath billowed through the cracks in the door. I winced my eyes tight, heard the door scream open on its bent hinges. The thing was in the room, willing me to look at it. It was moving closer. I could smell it now, an ancient thing, rotten moss and dirt. I felt it reach out for me. I rolled off the couch and onto the floor, screaming. I could feel the filth from the room clinging to my skin. I made a blind dash for the door, but tripped and sprawled onto the carpet. Lay panting. I was home, back in my home. I was Thomas me. This was no ordinary illness. Something was severely wrong. Orange light streamed through the window. My clock was no help. 5 a.m. or p.m. I checked my phone. I slept for almost 10 hours and still felt as though I'd been awake for days. I needed a doctor, medical help. Maybe the nurses at the hospice could offer me some advice. I unlocked my phone to call. An unread message popped onto the screen. I opened it. The message read, "Hey, great meeting you last night. I don't usually do that kind of thing. I'm a nice girl, really. Call me whenever." No telltale link to some seedy site at the end of the message. No request for money or to follow her on some social media page. Even the number looked legit below the saved contact. Number. I decided to ignore it, and I called the number for the hospice. The head nurse picked up. I told her who it was, but before I had the chance to ask her advice, she was already thanking me enthusiastically for stopping by with the donuts for the staff. "That was really sweet," she said. I was dumbfounded. She said she was happy. I was feeling so much better. She'd never seen me so perky. She asked how my plans were going for the trip, the one I'd used my favor to book the time off for short notice. I asked her when I'd booked this time off. She told me 3 days ago. But wasn't that Sunday? No, she said. Today is Saturday. I dropped the phone. That meant 3 days had passed since I'd fallen asleep on the couch. I've been asleep for 3 whole days. It couldn't be. And how would I book the time off in my sleep? I could hear her asking for me from the floor. I picked up the phone, made an excuse, and hung up. My head was swimming, or rather sinking. My body felt totally used up. I could have fallen back to sleep right then and there. The only thing keeping my eyes open was the dread pulsing around my body with each heartbeat. I had to find answers. There had to be some kind of clue, some link to what was happening. I remembered the message on my phone. I called Amber. I asked her who she was. There was a pause on the other side. She asked me what I meant. I demanded to know how we met. Amber told me I was getting weird. I ignored her and demanded again. She called me a creep, said she guessed she'd been wrong about me, and hung up. I never was much good with women. I looked around my apartment. Everything was so tidy. No dirty plates or cutlery. No empty takeaway boxes on the floor. Even my magazines and video games had been neatly put away on the shelf in alphabetical order. What sick bastard had alphabetized my stuff? I checked the trash. Vegetable wrappers from the supermarket, all organic. I dashed to the fridge, stocked with fruit, more organic vegetables, some kind of rice with quinoa written on the side, apricots, and meat from a local butcher. Where was my mustard? Where were my pickles, my hot dogs? A white-hot needle shot behind my eye. So painful, I nearly collapsed. Worst migraine of my life. Wincing, I checked my phone. Checked the history on the browser. I scrolled past a number of charity websites I'd apparently visited over the last 3 days. First time for everything, I suppose. There had to be something I was missing. I checked the files. There was one recording playing on MP3. I opened it. My blood froze. As my own voice rang through the tinny speaker, it was me, and yet not the same pitch and accent, yet somehow more languid calm. Hello, Thomas. Don't be startled. I know this all must be very distressing for you. For that, I apologize. It is not my intention to frighten you, but vessels rarely offer as much resistance as you have. You should be proud. I'll admit you're not a prime candidate, but I need to. My current vessel is damaged beyond repair, and I must transition soon. Unfortunately for you, amongst the staff and the hospice, your existence is least worthy. You've squandered your chance at finding meaning on this earth, and if you look within yourself, you know this will never change. That is not my doing. It is your own. Sadly, this is the state of most vessels, doomed to be used up and shriveled away without finding any purpose at all. A drop in the ocean, as they say. I want to make the world a better place, Thomas. I want to make something of your vessel. Give it to me. Give in. Rest. Make it easy on yourself, as you always have, and know that you'll be loved, adored by all. They will build statues of you, praise your name. Give yourself to me, Thomas. Sleep. At that, a guttural chanting began emanating from the speaker. Instinctively, I hurled the phone into the wall, shattering it into silence. I stood for a moment, exhaustion pulling my eyelids down, adrenaline holding them open. Something was coming up the stairs. That smell decay and ancient dirt thudding down the hall. Cobwebs began to form around me. I shook my head and they dissipated. Began to gather again. The thudding reached the door, filling the room with a stench. The apartment itself is twisting around me. I ran to the sink and splashed my face with water. The reek wafted away, and back in with each cold splash. I was fading. In desperation, I went to the toaster, set it, and took a deep breath. I jammed my finger into the glowing filament. The toaster exploded. I flew back and onto the ground, more awake than I'd ever been in my entire life. I lay on the floor, panting, looking around. Everything was normal. The only smell now was burnt hair, fragrant compared to what it had replaced. I had to stay awake just long enough for that bastard to die. I rummaged through my drawers. I found the trucker pills I'd bought when I started the job. They were still on date. I boiled a kettle, washed down twice the recommended dose of the pills with black coffee. It's been 32 hours since I heard myself on the recording. My heart is beating like a jackhammer. I'm so wired I didn't even recognize my own face in the mirror earlier. I look old. Every time my head drops, I hear that thing outside, getting stronger, beating on the door and groaning. It wants to be let in. It wants to see me. I think it may be death itself. Maybe it's whatever Muldoon really is. I don't know. Right now I'm doing anything I can to stay awake, to stop myself drifting off. That's why I'm writing this all out. Not even sure if anyone will believe me if they read it. What else can I do? Call the cops? Yeah, right. I consider going to the hospice and killing Muldoon myself. But even when that thing in the hall is keeping quiet, I know it's out there. I can feel it. It wants me to leave the apartment. It wants me to go to it. By the time anyone reads this, I'll either be me or I'll be gone, not sure how much longer I can hold out. The cobwebs are covering everything now, and when the thing outside groans, it sounds fierce, angry. At least I can still move my arms and legs. I think I'll watch some more TV, take the last of my trucker pills, maybe another cold shower. I wish I'd written that novel. Heck, it might have even been pretty good. Have you ever looked at a dog and thought that there's something behind their eyes, like they're smarter than they look? I've seen it with hundreds of dogs, but this was the first time I met a dog where it seemed like they're smarter than me. More than that, looking into Lucy's eyes felt like looking at a knife's edge. There's a danger behind those eyes, and Lucy is simply choosing not to hurt you. I live in a small town in eastern Ohio. In the middle of town, there's a pet store that's been owned by a local family for generations. It has mice, snakes, ferrets, and various birds. We even have a couple dogs and cats from the local animal shelter. In general, I've always enjoyed my job here. I've always loved working with animals. Of course, we've had our fair share of problems. I still remember the time that Chihuahua bit me, but overall, I do love it here. That all changed, though, when Lucy arrived. Lucy was a mixed breed. We weren't really sure what breeds were in her genetics, but my coworker Andy and I had fun guessing. She had a fluffy undercoat and curled tail, which made me think husky or, something close to it. Her ears were floppy, though, and her fur was a shiny gray color. Andy guessed she was part greyhound. Lucy also had blue eyes, which is quite rare. There was no denying that she was a beautiful dog, but as soon as she arrived at the pet store, everything started going wrong. I still remember the day I brought her into the dog room. At the time, we had a German Shepherd and a small mixed breed dog. As soon as we entered the room, both of them started growling at her, teeth bared, hackles raised. They couldn't stop staring at her. I had never seen them growl like that. Hey, it's okay, I said, trying to calm him down. The German Shepherd let out a deep bark. The small dog retreated to the corner of his crate, trying to get as far away from Lucy as possible. I led Lucy to her cage and shut the door, hoping that the dogs would calm down. They didn't. 2 hours later, the dogs were still growling and barking, and the strangest thing of all was that Lucy didn't even seem bothered by it. She just lay there in a crate, looking at them calmly and perfectly still. We eventually decided to move Lucy to the cat room. We weren't housing any cats at the time. Our manager said she'd reschedule future cat adoptions until the dog was adopted. Shouldn't take long for a beautiful dog like that, she said. Yeah, she's quiet too. Barely barks or anything, I replied. But a week passed. She didn't get adopted. The little dog was adopted before her. Even though he yapped so loud, it made my brain hurt. For some reason, people seemed put off by her. And then I found out why Andy was usually the one to supervise the pet visits. When a family came over to adopt, she'd take the pet into our adoption room and let them all hang out, to see if they were a good fit. But one day, Andy called in sick, and I had to supervise a visit between a family and Lucy. I was feeling pretty good about it. It was a family of 3, mom, a dad, and a little boy. The mother, who seemed to be the one in charge, was immediately attracted to Lucy. Wow, what a beautiful dog, she said, looking into the cage. And so calm, too. Wow, so quiet. So I took Lucy out of her crate, and I led her to the adoption room where the Robinsons were waiting. And then I took a seat in the corner, and I let the family interact with her. And that was when I finally realized why no one would adopt her. She didn't act the way you'd expect the dog to. She didn't approach the family or lick their hands or wag her tail. She didn't cower away from them in fear either. She simply walked into the corner of the room and sat down. She'd just stare at them with those cold blue eyes. An awkward silence filled the room. Finally, the boy got up and cautiously approached the dog. He asked if he could pet her. I nodded. He patted her on the head a few times. At first, she ignored him, and then she slowly turned to look at him. They stared at each other for a few seconds, and then the boy backed away. They made a few other attempts to connect with Lucy. There were toys in the adoption rooms, and the mother squeaked a squeaky toy, trying to get her interested. There was no reaction. The boy grabbed a knotted rope for tug-of-war and held it in front of her, trying to get her to play. She didn't. She just stared at him. The family left empty-handed, and I let Lucy back to her room all alone. And now I noticed something I hadn't before. As I passed by our other animals on display, they reacted to her. The mice scurried towards the opposite side of the cage, squeaking loudly. The birds squawked and fluttered to different perches. Even the fish seemed agitated, swimming back and forth in their tanks. I led Lucy back to her crate. As I closed the door and secured the lock, she stared up at me with those ice blue eyes, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Over the next few days, I tried to play with Lucy. Maybe she was just having trouble adjusting to the new environment. I took her into the adoption room myself. I squeezed the squeaky toy. I shook the tug-of-war toy. I brought out some treats, but she just sat there, still as a statue, watching my every move with those bright blue eyes. I took her for a walk on Thursday afternoon. We stayed in the parking lot and on the sidewalk next to the road, and she seemed completely disinterested in her surroundings. She didn't bark at the squirrel we passed. She didn't sniff the ground or pull at her leash. She just slowly walked by my side, and it was unnerving. I felt like I was walking a robot, or a human wearing a dog suit. It certainly didn't feel like I was walking a dog. And when we passed another dog on the sidewalk, it had the same reaction to her as the other dogs in the store. It backed away from her, snarling, baring its teeth. Lucy didn't growl or bark back. She just stared at it. She did react to one thing, though. About half a mile from the pet store, there's a small cemetery. As soon as we got close, Lucy began digging her paws into the cement. I gently tugged on her leash. "All right, come on, Lucy, just a little further." But she didn't budge. A chill went down my spine again. Could she see or sense something that I couldn't? Okay, I told her. "We'll go back to the store." As if she understood my words, she turned around and started heading back to the store. Now, I know my experience with dogs is limited. I haven't had a dog of my own in years, but I have never seen a dog act like that before, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong with her. Something is terribly wrong. When Andy got back to work, I asked her about Lucy. "Hey, where'd you get her again?" "She came from Brightview Rescue, I think." "Why?" Andy replied, cocking her head at me. "Doesn't she freak you out a little bit?" I asked. "No." Andy laughed, and I took a different approach. "Okay, she doesn't act normal. She just sits there and stares at everything." "Oh, come on, dogs have different personalities," she said. "Some are loud, some are quiet, some are friendly, some are shy. She's just one of the shyer ones. But don't worry, she'll find the perfect family in no time." I frowned. I mean, Andy was probably right. She had a lot more experience with dogs than I did. My family had a collie mix when I was a kid. That was it. Andy had 2 dogs of her own at home. She'd been working at the pet store a lot longer than I had. I decided to call Brightview Rescue to find out more about Lucy, though. If I knew her family history, maybe I could understand why she was acting so strange. Maybe I'd even be able to help her. Who knows? Maybe a small change to her environment, like giving her a different room or giving her different toys. Maybe that would make all the difference. When I called, they transferred me to a guy named Michael. He'd apparently handled all of Lucy's stuff when she was there. He told me a strange story. First off, he couldn't give me her family history because he found her in the woods right in the middle of nowhere. Second, he described the exact same stuff we've been dealing with. All the other dogs at the shelter barked and growled at her. A lot of people were interested in adopting her because she looked so unique. They quickly lost interest when all she did was stare at them. You know, I even had one guy ask me if she was a robot, he said with a laugh. Like he actually thought we were trying to pass off some AI robot dog as the real thing. "And you don't know anything about where she came from?" I asked again, and then he told me something that chilled me to the core. When Michael first found her, he'd assumed she was a runaway. Even though she was a mile out into the woods and didn't have a collar, she looked very well cared for. She wasn't thin or dehydrated or anything, so he'd spent that first week combing the internet and local bulletin boards for a missing dog that looked like Lucy. He found one. He immediately called them up, telling them he'd found their dog. But they told him that couldn't be possible because their dog had already been found 2 weeks ago. So this dog looked exactly like Lucy, Michael told me. The photo could have easily been a photo of her. Such a coincidence, you know? I mean, she is a very unusual looking dog to have two dogs like that in this small town. He went on and on about it for a while, and I had to agree with him. It was a very strange coincidence. For a long time after I hung up the phone, I just stared at the wall the more I learned about Lucy. The more uneasy I got, and I couldn't help but think there is something terribly wrong with this dog. That night I found myself all alone in the store after closing time. Andy and I had an agreement. She dealt with the reptiles, and I cleaned the grooming station after close. I've been afraid of snakes since I was a kid, so I was all too happy to sweep up dog hair for an hour if it meant I didn't have to deal with those things. I headed towards the grooming station at the back of the store. Humming, I began to sweep up the mound of dog and cat hair that had piled up throughout the day. I was almost done when I heard it. Barking, wild, frantic barking, echoing through the pet store. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I stood up and whipped around, scanning the store. From my vantage point, though, I couldn't see much. Did somebody break in? That was the only possible explanation, but I definitely locked the door after Andy left, and the alarm didn't go off. I grabbed a pair of sharp scissors and I headed down the aisle. The barking grew louder and more frantic as it rang in my ears. And that wasn't the only sound. From the aisle next to me, I heard the other animals. Birds screeching, snakes hissing, mice scampering wildly through their cages. I took a deep breath. I readied myself behind a display of cat food. And then I turned the corner and nothing. The front door was closed. The windows weren't broken. I let out the breath I've been holding. There was no way anyone could be inside the store right now. We were located inside a strip mall, so there were only two possible entry points, the front door, which I'd checked, and the back door near the grooming station. I didn't know why the dogs were barking, but I was safe. I tucked the scissors into my pocket and I turned around and finished cleaning, and that's when I saw it. The door to Lucy's room was open. Did she escape? I walked towards the door, my heart pounding in my chest. That's all I needed for Lucy to pee in the middle of the store, or break open some dog food, or do something else that required another hour of cleanup. But when I poked my head into the room, I gasped. The entire left wall of Lucy's cage had been broken off. It lay on the ground, slightly dented, and Lucy was nowhere to be found. Okay, just what I needed, I muttered under my breath. Then, raising my voice, I called for her. Lucy, Lucy, where are you? The animals had grown quiet. Now the store was dead silent. Another chill ran through me. I stood frozen, listening for the click of dog nails on tile. Lucy, I have treats for you. I grabbed the box of treats off the shelf and shook it. Here, girl. Nothing. What kind of dog doesn't come for treats? I mean, all the other dogs would have come running. I began to search the store, starting with a small pet aisle. I passed the snakes first, which were coiled up at the back of their cages. Forked tongues flicked out as they watched me, a few of them hissing. I continued past the birds, who looked at me wearily, and then past the mice who burrowed deep in the pine shavings. It almost seemed like they were trying to hide. Lucy, I called, and then I froze. There was a shadow in front of me, stretching out farther than my own. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt the air shift behind me. Something was standing behind me, something big. And it wasn't Lucy. Well, what do you want? I asked, my voice shaking. I wanted to turn around, but I didn't. What if they were armed? The shadow was too blurry to make out well, but they were clearly way taller than I was. I probably didn't stand a chance. My hand slowly went into my pocket, feeling for my wallet and my phone. I held both up behind me. Here, take him. Please, just don't hurt me. I had no idea how he got in. I thought maybe pick the lock, but hopefully he would just take my stuff and go. But he didn't take them. Instead, I felt something wet against my hand, Tom. I yelped and jumped back, and it was just Lucy, just standing there trying to pry the box of treats from my hand. I wheeled around, but the store was empty. Nobody was there. I looked down at the floor, and the shadow was gone. Now, there was no way he could have disappeared that fast, especially without making any sound, hands still shaking. I fed Lucy some treats, and then I led her back to her crate. I jerry-rigged it with zip ties, and then closed the door. I did a final loop around the store, but no one was there. Nothing was taken. Everything was right as it should be. So I locked up and I went home. When I got to the store the next morning, it was trashed. Bags of food were torn open, spilling out onto the floor. Toys were ripped off their racks. Even the animals seemed on edge. The store was filled with squawks and squeaks and barks. We thought there had been a break-in until we found Lucy at the back of the store, just chilling out when I checked her room. I found the crate completely destroyed. The zip ties held, but the opposite side had been busted open. I stared at the mess of dented metal. It was hard to believe that an 80lb dog had done so much damage. It was also hard to believe that a dog had turned the doorknob and opened the door. Our manager closed the store for the day. It took us nearly 5 hours to clean everything up. The damage was unbelievable. An empty fish tank had been shattered, scattering shards of glass everywhere. More than 10 bags of food had been ripped open. Even one of the lighting fixtures was smashed. After cleaning, I decided to watch the security footage because I refused to believe that Lucy could have done all this. Now we only have one security camera. It's right at the entrance to the store. You can only see the edge of one aisle and a few of the fish tanks, so I knew I wasn't going to get full footage of Lucy destroying the store or anything. I queued up the footage and I hit play. Around 1:15 a.m., Lucy escaped. I heard the door bang open from somewhere off screen, and then I heard rustling sounds and a loud thump. The one aisle in view of the camera shook, as if a huge weight had run into it. I leaned into the screen, heart pounding. Our aisles are bolted into the floor. There's no way a dog could shake an aisle like that. It'd probably take a 200lb man at the very least. Ramming his entire body into the thing, I watched as the aisle shook again. I heard this ripping sound as bags of food were being torn open off screen. And then I saw a shadow, an enormous shadow stretching across the floor, just like I'd seen last night. Bigger than Lucy. Bigger than me. The aisle shook again. I swallowed, and then the shadow got bigger. They were coming closer to the camera, and I held my breath as I watched the edge of the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw it, just for a split second, but I saw it. A long, twisted, sinewy leg, enormous elongated claws, gray skin, not fur. And then it was gone. I rewound the footage several times, but it was there. Something that didn't look like a dog's paw or a human hand, or like anything I'd ever seen before. But it was the exact same gray color as Lucy's fur. I showed the footage to Andy and my manager, but they both had reasonably boring explanations. Andy thought someone had broken in somehow and was wearing a Halloween costume for kicks. She said it was getting to that time of the year. My manager, on the other hand, explained that the wide-angle lens stretched out everything near the edges of the screen. So it was Lucy's paw, just distorted by the camera. I mean, their theories made more sense than mine, I guess. I'm not even sure what my theory was, but there were too many strange things that weren't adding up about Lucy. The next day, we reopened for business. I went in to check on her and make sure the new cage was still holding up. We'd have to move her to another shelter soon. The room needed to be opened up for cat adoptions. Plus, with how the other dogs didn't tolerate her, we didn't really have a choice. I was relieved. I didn't want to deal with her anymore. All I could think of when I looked at her was that horrible gray claw reaching out from the aisle. And I hated the way she just sat still like that, just staring at me. When I looked into those blue eyes, I felt like I was making eye contact with something far more intelligent than a dog. "Well, you're going to be out of here soon," I told her, patting the top of the cage. "You won't have to be here much longer." "That's a good thing, right?" She tilted her head slowly, as if she understood me. "And you'll get adopted by the next family. and you'll have a whole big house to run around in. It'll be really good, I promise." I tapped the cage again, and then I left the room. She watched me intently until I closed the door. That night, it was just Andy and me closing up the store again. She was handling the snakes while I was cleaning up the grooming station. She insisted on staying with me until I was ready to go, in case the kid in the Halloween costume came back. I just wanted this whole thing to be over with. I wanted Lucy gone, and 5 minutes before we officially closed, I heard the bells jingle at the front of the store. Andy and I exchanged a look, and then I walked towards the front of the store. "Hey, we're closing in 5 minutes." I called out as I approached. The last thing I needed was some guy who'd spend half an hour choosing dog treats. I rounded the corner, and there he was. He was tall and very skinny with curly blonde hair. It looked like he was a few years older than me. He glanced at me, then passed me further into the store. I immediately did not like this guy. There was something about him and about the way he was glancing around. It made me uneasy. I swallowed, thinking about last night. "Yeah, can I help you?" I asked in my most confident voice. He paused. The silence stretched out for several seconds, and then he finally spoke. "I'm looking for dog food." "Oh, all right. What type of dog food?" "We got canned, dry." "Anything's good," he replied. And that struck me as odd. Usually people know exactly what dog food they want. They'll have the brand, flavor, and size figured out. If this guy was good with any dog food, why didn't he just go to the West Market across the street? No need to come to our pet store. Especially because our stuff is usually marked up a bit. I walked down the aisle, leading him to the dog food section. "All right, here you go." "Lots of choices," I said, and he barely looked at them. Just grabbed one off the shelf and headed towards the cash register. What a weird guy, I thought. But as I headed towards the register, I heard it. "Hello?" Growl broke the silence. I whipped around and realized it wasn't coming from the dog room. It was coming from Lucy's room. In the week she'd been here, I had never heard her growl, and I turned back towards the man. He was staring at Lucy's door, but as soon as he saw me looking, his eyes snapped back up to me. "Yeah, can you hurry it up?" he asked, irritated. I grabbed a bag of food, scanned it, and I slid it across the counter. But when I looked up, I was face to face with a gun. "Open the register." "Empty everything into the bag," he said. My hands began to shake. I opened the register, and I grabbed the cash. There wasn't much, but I put it into the bag. My eyes never left the gun, pointed straight at my head. In my peripheral vision, I looked for Andy, but she must have still been in the back. I couldn't see her anywhere. My fingers slipped over the money. My heart was pounding in my chest while staring down the barrel of the gun. And then I heard it, a loud metallic sound. Coming from Lucy's room, the man's eyes flicked over to the door. "Is someone back there?" he asked, and I shook my head. If you're playing some kind of game with me, a loud bang interrupts him, and the door flies open. I whipped around, and all the blood drained out of my face, and an enormous shape came into view. Gray, sickly legs, long, thin, dozens of them, ending in huge claws. Its head was wolf-like, but when it opened its mouth, its rows of razor-sharp teeth, they looked more like a shark's. In its eyes, there were dozens of them, slitted and inky, black, and they all focused on the man with the gun. He turned white as a sheet, and then he turned around and ran out of the store as fast as his legs could take him. Had backed away from the counter. This thing towered above me, its head brushing the ceiling. Its dozens of legs moved like a spider crawling across the floor, heading towards its prey. I could hear Andy screaming somewhere behind me, but I couldn't turn away from this thing. This is it, I thought. This is how I die. I closed my eyes, and then I felt the tongue. Licking my hand, my eyes shot open, and there was Lucy dog Lucy standing in front of me, licking my hand. I wheeled around. Andy was frantically calling the police. She was freaking out and crying. I was numb, my legs very weak, Lucia said, and she just stared back at me with those bright blue eyes. Andy and I told our manager about Lucy. She didn't believe us. Neither did the police. They did catch the guy who attempted the robbery, though, and he confessed to everything. I cleaned out Lucy's room the next day. We needed a room for cats. Besides, she couldn't stay here. She'd continue to wreck the store and scare the other animals and do who knows what else. So I adopted her. And Lucy and we've had a great time so far. She's been enjoying long walks, hanging around my apartment, eating dinner scraps. I'm even trying to teach her how to play fetch. No luck yet, but we'll see. Though sometimes she does remind me that she's more than a dog. Every so often I'd hear howling in the woods near my apartment before Lucy. I never heard of any wolves there. She would howl back, and that's usually enough to stop it. But sometimes the howling will continue, and it'll start getting closer. When that happens, Lucy would be out the door as soon as I turned my back. By evening, she'd return covered in mud and a sticky black goo. I clean her up and give her a nice big dinner before she settles down in her bed. I've stopped wondering about what Lucy gets up to when she leaves, and I don't try to think about what that black goo is. Or about the time she brought home a gray, dismembered leg, similar to what I saw on camera all those months ago. It was gone by morning. I think, eventually, she will return to the woods. It is her home, after all. But for now, she seems happy enough sitting on the sofa with me, watching TV and getting head pats. And I don't mind the extra security. If anyone or anything tries to get in, they will get the fight of their lives. I work in the South Pole. I'm aware that sounds exciting, and it is, but it's a difficult job with taxing hours. We were sent to the middle of Antarctica with 1,000 miles of snow and ice on all sides. We worked a solid 7 to 5 o'clock, and with a lack of recreation, we typically do 18-hour days. However, we do have slow satellite Wi-Fi, which is what keeps me sane during the long days. Regardless, all this wasn't the problem. The problem was the sheer atmosphere of oppression. The whole place didn't feel right. Most of the facility is subterranean, with covered heaters atop the roof and an entrance into a cement stairwell. The bunker is what you'd expect. A gray concrete square with men's and women's bunking areas and a few couples' rooms. A large bathroom facility with shower and toilet stalls, plus 3 labs and a fully stocked cafeteria, all with no windows. There's also a medical bay and 2 rooms with couches for therapy. After the double-section entrance was the rec room. It had a pool table and a bar. The wall was knotty pine with paneling like from the 1970s. The rooms were all attached by a long, dingy hallway, including 2 offices and desks and chairs. I spent most of my time there. Atop the station was an observation deck, reachable with a ladder, with windows where we could see and hear the outdoors. But we usually only went up to smoke since it was nearly as cold as the outside. The whole place was poorly lit, fluorescent lights, and a few lamps in corners. But overall, it looked like a dingy green underground cement hill. Outside is exactly what you would expect from Antarctica. Snow for hundreds of miles in all directions. If you have a fear of open water, feels like that, except you have to walk in it. I was slightly surprised that they invited so many on this particular expedition. There were 12 of us in total, and usually 6 would suffice. All professionals in our fields. However, the range of work each of us did was surprising. Typically, it would be a singular field of study to accomplish a common goal, but there were several different professions on this expedition. The first was an older Finnish gentleman, a medical doctor, who was skilled in healing injuries in frozen climates. The next was a physicist who really was as surprised as us to be in the South Pole, but their work is often theoretical and, when in practice, requires a team in and of itself. The next 2 were a British husband and wife team, both geologists. There were 3 men in their 30s for maintenance and driving, specializing in sub-zero conditions and masters in any repair field. Also, there was a biologist, a young woman who wore her hair in a bun and kept her lab coat on at all times inside. She was all work and no fun. Then there were even 2 therapists. Yeah, therapists. The first is what you'd expect. A middle-aged lady with blonde bangs and a clipboard, always wearing a warm smile. The other, well, he was a tall, lanky fellow. He was gaunt and his hair was jet black. Honestly, I had no idea why he would be a therapist. I myself didn't even want to say hi to him. I never saw anyone join him in therapy, unless he specifically asked them. I usually tried to avoid the guy. There was another man who I assumed was a cook until I saw we had to make our own meals. He was an odd, mouthy looking fellow, didn't speak to anyone, and when I tried, he would simply ignore me. I decided that he would be my favorite person on this expedition because he kept 100% to himself. Me? Well, I was the chaplain. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. There are half a dozen professionals here, and why is there a chaplain? Well, I didn't think it made sense either. But when I was contacted by the organization funding the trip, I didn't argue. They were offering a lot of money. In my line of work, that is a rarity. The expedition was to be 6 months, and we were to each conduct specific experiments. I don't know what the others were assigned, but I was to journal on the religious implications of the expedition and provide any counsel for all the other participants on the trip of any sect or faith. The counsel assignment I didn't have a problem with, but the journaling, that's the kind of thing college freshmen journal on in Theology 101. Either way, I was getting paid, so I sucked it up and spent the rest of my free time downloading movies and games to pass the long hours in between counseling. Surprisingly, a lot of people came to me for religious discussion. I won over the maintenance guy's approval when I cracked open a beer with him and talked Catholicism on the old red rec room couch. I'm a Protestant minister, actually, so they were a little standoffish at first, but we became fast friends, and even though I couldn't bless them or give confession, I think it helped ease stress to feel like they could disclose matters of faith as well as just have a good conversation. Either way, I got along well with everyone after enough time. The physicist was a staunch atheist, so we played pranks on each other frequently. I would hide his laptop out of easy reach, blaring Jesus Take the Wheel, and he would wake me up half the day with No Church in the Wild. I consider him my second best friend in the compound, even though that song did give me chills when I thought about just how far away we were from civilization. My best friend was an odd man. He was always around the rec room when I was, but he never spoke. He wore an orange hoodie and jeans indoors, and he always seemed like he was drinking alone at the dimly lit makeshift bar. I thought nothing of it since our schedules were all different, and I could absolutely condone drinking yourself senseless in a place like this. It was lonely most days. We did our own thing at our own stations, often eating lunch there, frozen meals or MREs usually. I did spend quite some time talking with the doctor. He was a Buddhist, so he spent many mornings meditating in his medical station under the buzzing fluorescent lights. He said that the place gave him an odd feeling. It was hard to be centered here in the cement brick buried in the snow. It did get to me after a while. When I was alone and the lights were quiet, I swear I could hear whispering after one particular incident, where I swore I heard clear words. I started wearing headphones. They helped quite a bit with filling my ears with noise and blocking out the outside world. Once a week, supplies were dropped in from the coastal base hundreds of miles away. We restocked the cigarettes, whiskey, and other non-essentials like food and water. I say that to point out whoever was paying for this was dropping serious money. I never met the main client. Rather, I was contacted through their representatives. Apparently, the man funding was very wealthy, very driven, and very religious, and he was highly invested in this expedition. He wanted success, but no one knew his goal with this ordeal he was funding. Also, once a week, we would go out in a snow rover, a giant SUV that could ride over the snow and ice. We would take samples of the ice and examine a previous dig site from the last crew. I could not imagine the crew that had come all the way out here to build the facility, but I bet they got paid crazy money. Some days we would all go just to get out and see the sun. We couldn't leave during a blizzard, but most days only the necessary crew for the excavation would go. Whenever we went, we had to wear a harness attached by rope to the SUV to avoid slipping down the ice and being injured. We could only go once a week due to the outside conditions and distance to the dig site. I mentioned both of these to say that we were alone out here. And if a plane came Monday, then we had 7 days until it returned. Then was the first big shift. It was exactly 2 months in the base. The team who left that day were the geologists, the biologist with one maintenance man to drive and man the harnesses. They left in good spirits, and they remained at the site for hours. However, they returned shaken. They burst in the door while I was in the rec room with a therapist, and we immediately noticed the fear in their eyes. The lady geologist ran to the couple's room without saying anything. Her husband chased after her, calling her name. We asked what happened, and we noticed the biologist was crying. The other therapist entered the room like a ghost, and without a word, he ushered her into his office and closed the door. The doctor burst in and boomed. "What on earth is going on?" "I don't know," said the first therapist. She was anxious as I was. "Where's Jack?" I began. "Wait, where's the car?" Jack was the maintenance worker who drove the SUV. I opened the door to the outside and I saw nothing but our flag, a long set of footprints, and miles of ice gleaming in the sunlight. We sat for what felt like hours in a rec room. All of US who didn't go on the field expedition, that is. The others were in the tall therapist office. Panicked voices could be heard behind the door. Finally, they all came out. The geologist went to their room without saying a word. The biologist sat in one of the empty folding chairs. The therapist stood behind her, hands in the back of her seat. She'd clearly been crying since she came back. We got there ahead of schedule. She started gathering her composure. The dig site. We arrived at 0700 instead of 8, so we all got to work early. At first, everything was fine. Jack was in the SUV, minding the harnesses. I was chiseling away at a small patch of ice when I heard the others call from below. We looked at her, hanging on her every shaking word. She continued. I slid down to the base of a hole, about 30 meters down. I think they'd struck a hard surface. We all dug together and pulled out a massive lockbox immediately. We assumed it was left from the last dig, but the design was old. It looked like something from World War II. It was heavy and sealed shut. We tugged the rope to signal Jack, but there was no response. We started calling out for him, but he never called back. We couldn't see him from our vantage point. After a solid 10 minutes of screaming, we made our way up the hill using our tools. We used an extra length of cord to pull the box up. It took all 3 of us, but we got it up. When we reached the top, Jack was nowhere. We searched the perimeter for well over an hour. We checked for holes in the ice and signs of footprints, but his earlier tracks never left the side of the SUV. We loaded the box in the back and we kept looking. We noticed something then, something we absolutely already should have seen. When we climbed atop the vehicle for a better vantage point, we saw a massive single message in the snow. "Run." We looked at her in disbelief, the mutual feeling of sympathy, and that I could have searched better. People tend to have. She started tearing up again. We panicked. We drove away, but none of us can operate a vehicle designed for snow and ice. We crashed into a massive pothole about a mile south of here. We left the car and walked back. The find is still there, and Jack is somewhere out there. After this, she broke down in sobs and left for the dorm. Jack hadn't answered a single radio call or even made an attempt at reaching us. The dig site was an hour's drive from our base, and we were thousands of miles from any other researchers. We were essentially powerless to do anything. "All right, first things first," said one of the other repairmen. "We need to get our ride back." He suited up. Then he and the other maintenance workers left on a snowmobile designed for a short distance. Now, I don't know how they did it, but they managed to bring the SUV back safely in less than an hour. By now it was getting dark, and the search for Jack would be too dangerous to continue tonight. We didn't sleep that night. The odd man didn't even come to bed. He just wandered the halls drinking. I lay there, listening to music to drown out the sounds of crying from down the hallway. This concrete slab, this tomb in the middle of a frozen dead zone. We were completely and utterly alone, the doctor said before bed. If Jack is still alive, he may be better off out there. The next morning we set out, all of us except the 2 therapists and the odd man who I assumed was sleeping off a hangover. We dragged the locked box out of the vehicle and laid it in the rec room. We loaded up and decided to deal with opening it later. We searched the dig site and surrounding area until evening and turned up nothing. The message in the snow wasn't there anymore, and there had been no snowfall that night. We found no tracks, no sign, no body, no anything. We returned depressed and feeling responsible for our missing companion. When we returned, however, we were greeted by an odd sight. On the snow was a ski-fitted jet, and not like the crappy jump plane that dropped us off. This was an expensive private jet. We entered the facility to the sounds of loud, booming laughter. A short, bald man with a white goatee sat in the rec room with the shrinks. He was smoking a cigar and wore a very nice suit. Two very large men in sunglasses stood on either side of the door. We were slightly stunned. Well, the man said in a hard southern drawl, turning to us, "If it ain't the rest of the body, allow me to introduce myself." He stood, extending his ringed hand. "My name is Earl. Pleased to meet you all, finally." We took turns awkwardly introducing ourselves, realizing this must be the guy in charge. He invited us into the cafeteria to have an official meeting. This was the second weird shift in the trip. He offered condolences in regards to Jack and expressed that it was no one's fault he went missing. As for that message in the snow, he said, lowering his voice, "I would say this whole place tells you to run at some point. Don't let it get to you." He finally revealed his focus of the expedition, that we weren't to discover any signs of past visits man had ventured. He also expressed that he wanted to colonize the South Pole, but needed to know the psychological effects of people living here. That's why he sent 2 mental health associates and a minister. He pointed at me saying this, making me feel exposed and kind of awkward. He again thanked us and sent us to bed after the best steak dinner I have ever had. This guy was serious. He flew in his personal chef to thank us for our work. The next morning, after a bacon and eggs breakfast, he took us into the tall therapist office. Wanted time to shoot the shit, as he put it. When it was my turn, he was very respectful, a gesture I appreciate when no one knows I'm a minister, but it feels forced at times when there is pretense. "How are you, Reverend?" he asked softly. Well, I replied, not sure how to answer that question in light of the past few days. Glad to hear it. He smiled at the ground. "Now, son, I'm going to level with you. You are the most important person here." "How's that?" I asked, wondering if he was just trying to flatter me. Well, he started looking for the right words. This trip, it's more psychological research than anything. We wanted a religious figure and at least 2 therapists to log the mental strain on living out here. We want to build a new civilization, but we've been testing different groups in small segments of time. "But why me?" I asked. Well, he said, smiling, "I'm a Methodist boy myself, but I picked you because of an article you wrote a while back. You said in the final line that you have the same philosophy as me." "What's that?" I asked. I'd written a few articles in my time, and I didn't know which one he meant. "You said that to truly understand God, we must also understand his counterpart." I immediately knew the article to which he referred. It was something I wrote after seminary on demonology in modern society. I shuddered as this was an unpleasant field of research. Either way, the man had done his work on me, but I still wasn't sure what a short article on demons qualified me for a mission in the Antarctic. I left the room with Earl, and we proceeded to rejoin the others. We listened to him rant rather than talk amongst ourselves. We just didn't feel right. We were here in the warmth with this man bellowing on. While our friend was still out there, I overheard many times the biologist and geologist asking to leave. At first, their requests were simply brushed off, but by the last ones, he sternly reminded them that they were under contract. They went to their rooms after that. Earl left that night with the instruction to report our findings, if there were any. He then boarded his plane with his bodyguards and left promptly. Before bed, I swear I heard whispering from the observation deck, but when I went to see it, there was nothing. The next day, a massive blizzard rolled in. We resolved that Jack had died in the snow outside. No person could survive a sub-zero blizzard after 3 days. And this is officially where things went bad. We decided to open the lockbox. It was sealed by metal welding all the way around. It took a little while, but the other 2 maintenance men used blowtorches, and the chest finally came free. They strained to pull the lid off its container. We gathered around close. I found myself the closest to the box. They flipped the heavy lid over. We saw black soot come loose. We coughed and looked down. There was nothing, or at least nothing important. We found a piece of string, a thimble, and salt. We sat there rubbing our heads and looking at each other. We discussed why this should be out there in the ice so many layers deep. We talked a little while until I noticed the physicist leaving. He was pale as a ghost, so I chased him to ask what was wrong. "Hey, are you good?" I asked. He stood there, shaking his head. After a long pause, he said no. "What is it?" I asked. I was curious as to why he was acting so strange out of nowhere. Meanwhile, I saw the other participants walk down the hall to the cafeteria. Only I noticed that the man in the orange hoodie was nowhere. My thoughts were shaken when the physicist spoke up. "Did you see the word on the lid?" He asked quietly. "No," I replied. I was confused. "You can't read Hebrew, can you?" he asked. No, I study." "You can?" I asked. Yeah, I'm Jewish, or was. I can read Hebrew well enough, at least." His voice shook. I wish I couldn't, though." "What did it say?" I asked. "It said Dybbuk," he said, and he began to cry. I'd never seen him like this. It made me a little scared. Hey, you can't buy into that," I began. "No," he said, cutting me off. "You know as well as I do that this place is wrong. It does things to you, God. The first week I chased footsteps around a shower every morning, only to realize I was alone every single time," he said. Hey, listen," I began. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "We're going to be okay." I wish I could say I was telling him the truth, but that box did have this weird feeling around it. That night, around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps. They were so loud I heard them over my headphones. I went to check around, and no one was awake besides me. I heard soft sobbing from the couple's room, but I knew better than to disturb them. They had it pretty rough right now. As I returned to my bunk, I walked by the cafeteria, and I caught something awful. I turned to see the most horrifying sight I ever have. All the chairs and tables were scattered and flipped. Food was smeared all along the walls and ceilings, and utensils and appliances were everywhere in the center of the floor. Was a massive rusted steel cross, and Jack was nailed to it. He was soaked from head to toe in blood, and his eyes looked as if every vein had just burst. Barbed wire covered his arms and legs, and nails were driven through his wrists and ankles. He was bald and thin, and when we made eye contact, he shook violently. And then he yelled through splattering blood, "Belfager." Now was my turn to lose it. I fell backward and slid on the tile. I must have been screaming, because everyone poured into the hallway asking what happened. I pointed to the cafeteria, and the inside was totally normal. Nothing was out of place. No cross, no Jack, no destruction. It was only 3 hours later I awoke in the rec room covered by a blanket. Jane, the therapist, was asleep on the opposite couch. She was sweet through all this, and I'm sure she was disappointed in my lack of professionalism. I'd been drinking, and I was still drunk when I stood up. Everyone was still asleep, and I could hear the blizzard. I wandered the hall, and I heard the sobbing from the couple's room again. I realized in my stupor that they might need help. I knocked softly on the door, but the crying continued. Before I could knock again, I ran and vomited into the toilet. Now feeling slightly more alert as I stood wiping my mouth, I caught the brief glimpse of a figure leaving the bathroom. It was dark and tall, but I couldn't catch any more details. I finally had enough and returned to my bunk. I fell into a restless sleep that night, but I did sleep. I awoke the next day to someone shaking my arm. "Hey, wake up," the voice said. It was one of the maintenance men. "Power's out and people are missing." I stood groggily. He turned to the hallway, where I could hear voices in the cafeteria. I saw the only other person in the room was the physicist. He was facing away towards the wall. He didn't move. He just laid there. I only left because I saw him breathing. I walked into the cafeteria. It was lit by emergency candles on the tables where I saw the biologist, Jane, the doctor, and the 2 maintenance men. Counting me, this was less than half our original group. They turned, and the other maintenance man said, "Well, look who it is. Are you going to scare the hell out of all of us again?" I didn't smile or disagree. I just sat beside the doctor and asked where the geologists were. They won't answer their phones. They won't answer their door, Jane said, her age beginning to show in her tired eyes. The other therapist as well is missing. We're leaving, said the biologist. As soon as this blizzard dies down, screw their contracts. How? I began. We're 1,000 miles from the nearest base. Well, said the man who woke me. We have a massive sled we'll load with every tank of gas. Then we just have to get within 50 miles to the nearest base to be within radio contact. We have GPS, we'll drive in shifts, and we'll take our time and we'll avoid any pitfalls. Does everyone agree? Everyone nodded in agreement. All right, in that case, I suggest we spend the next few days together, hoping the missing members return, and if not, then we will beg for their forgiveness. I spent the day sitting in a daze. We all layered up in the dark and hunkered down. We made small talk in an attempt to fill the void. The dancing candlelight played tricks on our eyes, and the dark was oppressive. The six of us sat there, just sitting and waiting. Finally, around 1800, Jane suggested we check on the geologist. We stayed close down the hallway and heard the sobbing. It was softer, but still there. Jane knocked, waited, knocked again. Then she shouted she was coming in, but the door was locked. The maintenance man began pounding his fist and threatened to break in. He pulled out a key. It fit the door, and he slowly opened it to the bedroom. Inside was a nightmare. The first thing I saw was the blood. It was everywhere. The walls, the bed, the ceiling, the floors. It covered the lamp and bathed the room in a deep red. On the bed was the male geologist. His mouth and eyes were wide open. His throat was torn out, and his leg was chewed to the bone. His wife sat beside him. She turned to look at us, covered in blood herself. She was crying and chewing. She sputtered the bloody meat while sobbing. Her expression turned from sorrow to one of rage. She contorted her mouth to scream, but only a gargle came out. The maintenance workers shut the door. We pushed tables in front of it. We piled enough furniture in front of that door to board her in her cage. We returned to the rec room. Everyone was crying, and Jane was in a fetal position. Okay, we leave tomorrow, the doctor said. The blizzard still raged outside. It felt like the wind was mocking us. I don't know how, but I must have fallen asleep at some point because a massive blast woke me. I looked up to see the others jump to their feet. We got ourselves to the ladder and climbed to the observation deck. Outside, we saw blackness expanding, all except for a large patch of light a few meters away. Through the whiteout conditions, we could see fire. The SUV was in flames, gas tanks stacked around it, and atop the flames was a person. As I looked closer, I could see they were dancing. Oh my God, the biologist said. Jane? As I looked closer, I saw it was Jane. She was naked and being burned alive by the flames. Her howls echoed through the dark storm. We watched as the fire consumed her. She shrieked and screamed, and then she finally fell silent. We walked downstairs, feeling hopeless. We sat in the dark of the rec room, and no one spoke until morning. The physicist was still in bed. He was trying to ignore everything, but at this point I knew he was too far gone. The footsteps were loud in the empty rooms, and at this point I thought I would die here. We huddled in blankets and coats against the wall. Candles were the only light. I closed my eyes, so I couldn't see the dark shadow pacing the room in front of us. The next morning the power returned, the lights were flickering, and we stood slowly in the dim glow. I heard music playing in the showers. We all walked together and looked inside. Within was the song Jesus Take the Wheel being played on loop from an MP3 player. We walked into the dull gray room, and we saw the physicist sitting on the floor in front of the iPod. Blood was running into the drain beneath him. He slowly turned his head to me. He held up his left hand to his lips and hissed a long shoe. He lifted a bloodied hand, closed his eyes, and smiled a large, toothy smile. He whispered behind closed teeth. I like this song now, my God, said the doctor. He slowly approached the bloodied man, attempting to keep him calm. It's okay, boy. I'm here to help, he said. The physicist snickered again, eyes still closed and smiling as the doctor got close. The man yelled with an inhuman volume and sprang forward. He tackled the doctor to the ground and he sunk his teeth into his neck. He turned to us. The doctor sputtered blood and choked for air as the man crouched to leap towards us. A bang filled our ears. I looked and I saw the physicist was now laying dead in a pool of his own blood. In his head was a circular wound, and I realized one of the maintenance workers had shot him. We were now for me, the biologist, and the two maintenance workers. Everyone else was now missing or dead. Although the power was on, the satellite was down, thus ruining our chances for radio and Wi-Fi. We paced for hours, and then one of the maintenance men spoke up. Our only chance at survival is to fix that dish, he said. We looked at him and agreed. The outside was still completely whited out from the amount of snow and wind. All right, I'll go, said the other man. No, we'll go together, said the first. The biologist, and I didn't argue. We watched them in their coats leave into the unforgiving blizzard. We waited for what seemed like hours, searching for radio signals and Wi-Fi. Finally, it came back. We smiled for the first time in a long while, and prepared for the men's return. We sat and waited and waited and waited. We didn't say anything, but we knew. We knew we were the last. She fell asleep in my lap before I closed my eyes, and I swear I heard the giggles of a child. At some point, I fell asleep. I awoke and I was alone. I yelled for the biologist. I searched every room until I found the last thing I wanted to find. She was in the observatory. She wrote a lovely note about wanting to see the outside world before she died. In her arm was an empty syringe. Her eyes were just blank. Staring into oblivion, I left her alone there. Now, the reason I write this in my probable last moments of clarity, the reason we were brought to this frozen hell only to die, the reason I'm sending out this story before I put a flare gun down my mouth. I returned to the office I've been using. I was hysterical. I saw my reflection in the display mirror, and I noticed that my eyes were completely black. I smashed the mirror. I sliced my knuckles, which rocked me back to reality. And in my seconds of clarity, I noticed the slip of paper that fell from the shattered pieces. It was a note with a picture attached. The note read, "If you're reading this, then I hope it isn't too late. This place is not what you think. The man in charge is not a religious kook. He is much more dangerous. By now, you may have found that undiscovered lockbox. In it, you found some trinkets to spook you. There's probably a minister with you to comment on the materials as evil. This is their set and setting. That black soot that came out. It wasn't dust and it wasn't evil. These people don't want to colonize. You ever wonder why you're so far away from the other bases? This is a weapons testing facility. You have unknowingly been testing compounds for a private company. This particular compound is an untraceable psychosis-inducing strain of pathogen that is meant for world leaders. The concept is to have the enemy kill itself. If you breathe the black dust, then it's too late. All you can do is attempt to get this message out. Do not trust the maintenance men, and do not trust the tall therapist. They're working for Earl. They will disappear without a trace shortly after his visit. They've logged your behaviors, so even if the blizzard, which is what I assume you're already in, subsides, you'll be found and killed if you escape. I'm so sorry. I lost my entire team. I wish you never would have come." The note was signed by Dave. The picture attached was what I assume was the previous team. In Reading, a man was circled and labeled me. In the picture was a mouse man in an orange hoodie. I was about 17 years old when all this happened. My brother Noel was working the overnight shift at a convenience store in town, and I went with my friend Tom to visit him. We entered the shop around midnight and found him sitting behind the counter looking bored. The well-lit store was well-stocked, full of mostly junk food and soft drinks. I noticed just inside the entrance that a $1 coin was sitting on the polished floor. It was gleaming and looked brand new. Reaching down, I tried to pick it up off the floor and found it wouldn't come up. What the hell? Tom pushed me out of the way, tried to pick it up himself, and found the same thing. It was stuck to the floor. Noel burst out laughing from behind the counter. "Oh man, you guys are so gullible. People have been falling for that all night. What did you do? Super glue it to the floor?" I asked. He nodded and kept laughing. "All right, I guess that's kind of funny." We sat with him behind the counter and talked for a while, waiting for my other friend Brad to show up. He was supposed to bring a board game that he'd found in his basement. Every once in a while, a customer would come in, and we'd try not to laugh when they attempted to pick up a coin unsuccessfully. Some would give up right away, but others got extremely frustrated and would pull out their car keys or use their fingernails to try to pry it up from the floor. Part of me couldn't help but wonder if Noel was going to get into trouble when his boss came in the morning and found the coin still fastened securely to the floor. Finally, Brad came in with a backpack and a dusty box in his hands. It was a black cardboard box, ripped and cracked at the corners. I noticed the bag he was carrying was clinking as well, like it was full of glass bottles. The box containing the board game had faint writing on it. That looked medieval and archaic. It read Dungeons and Darkness. That's weird. I've heard of Dungeons and Dragons, but not Dungeons and Darkness, I said to Brad after we exchanged greetings. Yeah, same here. We were tearing apart the basement doing renovations, and we found the box under the stairs. It was in a burlap sack with these really old bottles of Coca-Cola, Brad said. He opened up his backpack and pulled out several tall glass bottles with the distinctive feminine curves of Coke containers, but there was a number written on them. "Are you sure these are Coca-Cola?" "It doesn't say it on the bottles." "I'm pretty sure." Anyways, I'm going to drink one and see how it tastes. Tom, Noel, and I laughed and tried to convince him that that was a terrible idea. The bottles looked like they were from a century ago. His house was built in the early 1900s, so there was no way of knowing when they were boarded up under the stairs in his basement. I had him in the fridge. Come on, guys, don't you want to try and see what 100-year-old Coke tastes like? We were young and bored and stupid, so we agreed. He handed each of us a bottle, and I felt the coolness of it in my hands. Holding it up, I looked at the liquid inside the bottle. It had a vague vermilion shade to it at the edges when held up to the fluorescence. We each opened up our bottles and took a sip. It was sweet and bubbly, like a soft drink, but not quite. The sugary beverage was cool and refreshing. It tasted delicious despite its age, but was nothing like Coca-Cola. See? What did I tell you, man? That's good. Brad looked very satisfied with himself. Want to set up this board game? Noel asked, sipping his drink. We got the board game laid out and picked our characters. I was a paladin. Noel chose a barbarian. Brad picked an elven archer, and Tom decided upon a dwarf after a long period of deliberation. Each character had a game card which showed their abilities and a special move which could be used only once per game. We also received a starting weapon, in my case a sword. The starting location on the map where we would begin the game was, interestingly enough, labeled Shop. It was about then that we noticed there were no dice with the game. The instructions were also missing. There were no clear directions on how to start playing other than to put our game pieces on the start location in the shop. The only other item in the box was a stack of cards which Brad had shuffled and set beside the board game. There was nothing to do but draw a card from the stack. So I did, and I read it out loud. A visitor arrives at the shop. I flipped the card over and looked at the back of it, thinking there had to be more, but there wasn't. Taking a long sip of my syrupy sweet drink, I looked up at the sound of a bell ringing above the door as it opened. My mind was spinning, and I gazed confusedly around the room. Bolting up from my chair, I gasped. It was like we'd been teleported somehow to a shop in a medieval fantasy world. Potions and vials lined the shelves on the walls. Herbs hung from the ceiling, as well as furs and dried meats. Instead of fluorescence, the store was now dimly lit by flickering torches and candlelight. Oh man, what was in that drink? I asked Brad, feeling dizzy. He was standing up too, and all of us were looking around the room in a delirious confusion. Blast it. What sort of black magic spellery did you boys cast on this gold piece to bind it to the floorboards like this? The customer at the door was on his hands and knees trying to pull up the coin from the floor. What the hell's going on? Noel asked, looking extremely worried. The man on his hands and knees by the door eventually stood up, looking slightly embarrassed. He was wearing long blue robes and a floppy pointed hat. He had a long white beard and carried a tall wooden staff with a large jewel set into the top of it. His bushy eyebrows went up as he looked over at all of us staring at him. Why? I suppose it's some sort of jest, then. A deep-throated laugh poured out of him then. It was a good-natured laugh, and he walked towards us with a wide grin on his face. Oh, you boys should think yourselves quite clever, pulling one over on a wizard such as myself. I am quite a prominent figure around these parts, you should know. We all stared at him, our jaws hanging down. Right. Well then, I'll take 3 red potions if you don't mind. I've got the silver for it, don't worry. I looked to see behind the counter were rows and rows of vials containing potions of various colors and shades. Picking up a red one, I saw it had a heart shape on the front of it. Let me guess. Healing potion. I asked him, feeling as if I was in a dream, but knowing somehow that I was not. You should know you're the shopkeeper, aren't you? Of course. Red potion for healing, green for mana, blue for... What am I telling you for? Here, give me those. I've got a date with a dragon, and I can't be late for it. He slammed his silver pieces on the wooden counter and grabbed 3 potions for himself and stomped out angrily, muttering under his breath. We all stayed silent for a minute after he left, still in complete shock. What the hell was in those drinks, Brad? Tom finally said. All of our bottles stood empty, and I immediately regretted finishing it so quickly. But it was pretty tasty. Well, look guys, our pieces moved on the game board. Noel was staring at the board, and he was right. The pieces moved forward to the next location. It says dungeon entrance, I noted, looking at the board. I don't like the sound of that. Looking up, I saw a wooden sign which was swinging at the back of the store, as if it had just been struck by a strong wind. It was squeaking, hanging from a pair of rusty chains. I could have sworn it hadn't been there a second ago. Dungeons in Darkness, it read. An arrow was pointing down a staircase, which had also recently appeared at the back of the store. The cards were missing from the game board. I mentioned this to the other guys. I think we're supposed to go down there, said Noel. Oh no. Hell no, I'm not going down there. Tom was saying, looking extremely nervous. I get the feeling it's the only way out of here, I said, pointing at the game board. At the very end, at the top of the board, after the dungeons, was a tile marked finish. Nope, I'm not going down those steps, not doing it. I'm going to stay right here until these century-old hallucinogenic soft drinks wear off, Tom said. Suddenly, the entire room began to shake, and the walls started to move in towards us as if they were on rollers. They began to close in on us, and the room shrunk smaller and smaller, turning it from a square-shaped room into a hallway. The wood-beam walls crushed the shelves in the way, and bottles fell to the floor, glass vials breaking and shattering. I don't think we have a choice, guys, I said, running towards the stairs. Tom and Brad ran after me, and reluctantly Noel came too, grabbing a few red potions quickly as he left the area behind the counter. I watched as the entire shop was crushed, and the walls closed off the door behind us, leaving us at the top of a strange staircase. Stone steps led downward, and torches lined the rough brick walls. We made our way down and eventually reached the lower level. Weapons were hanging from a rack down there, waiting for us. A sword with a red cross on the hilt for the paladin, a large double-sided steel axe for the dwarf, a bow and quiver of arrows for the elven archer, and a big old club for the barbarian. I don't know how the hell you're going to carry that thing, Noel, I said, looking over to him. But then I stopped short when I saw Noel had grown by about 3 feet and was now a towering hulk with wide shoulders, wearing furs and leather boots. Tom had become a squat dwarf with a long braided orange beard. He wore black chainmail armor and had a square-shaped helmet atop his head. He had a large gut, I saw also, which overhung his belt. Brad still had his familiar facial features, but had pointed ears now and long, flowing blonde hair. He wore green leather armor and with quick, easy movements threw the quiver over his shoulder and picked up the bow in his hands. I grabbed the sword and found that when I looked down, I was wearing gleaming white gold armor with a red cross on the breast. Well, I guess we're all set, I said, looking into the darkness of the dungeon ahead. Only one way to go now. Forward. From the darkness ahead, a piercing scream shattered the silence, an echoing howl of such pain and terror that my heart skipped a beat. I felt sweat beading on my forehead suddenly. My heart began to hammer and pound in my chest, and I tried to control the fear in my voice. Come on, guys, we got this. Stepping forward, we left the flickering glow of torches in the stairway and were swallowed up by the darkness. The four of us moved silently through the dark tunnels of the dungeon. Rats squeaked and ran underfoot, and I began to see the shapes of them as my eyes adjusted. Finally, after walking for a long while, there was a flickering light up ahead. As we approached, I saw two guards standing in front of a wrought iron gate. Once we were within a few yards of them, I managed to see their grim visages. They had no flesh upon their faces. I could see right into the skeletal remains of their skulls and could discern no brains within them, only shadows. Perhaps that explains what happened next. Who goes there? The one on the right commanded. Hello, I said. Jordan and Noel, Brad and Tom, can we go through the gate, please? We're trying to get home. Oh, well, aren't you a gracious bunch? They're very polite, Gregor. I don't know. We've ever had one who said please before. You're right, Killick. They're quite well-mannered, but that's not the point. This is supposed to be a challenge. The challenge is to defeat the skeleton guards at the entrance gate, not to be polite to them. Well, I can't see why an exception can't be made now and again. It isn't hope for you. We've been over this before. They continued bickering back and forth for a minute, and I got a bit concerned. The skeleton guards had thick plate mail armor and large, heavy-looking swords. I guess they would be formidable foes, despite their obvious lack of gray matter. I just want to say you guys are doing an excellent job. I coaxed, trying to persuade them with further kindness. And if I run into your manager further along in the dungeon, I want to pass along my positive comments to him. You can count on that. Really? The one on the left raised his eyebrows. Definitely. I'd say you're both due for a promotion. See, said the one on the right. Let's just let them through. They'll put in a good word for us. He said it himself. No one's ever put in a good word for us before. They opened the gate for us without further discussion, and we walked through it. Be careful, Gregor, the skeleton guard said from behind us. There are booby traps everywhere, and enemies around every corner. The shrill scream echoed out through the dungeon once again. It sounded so familiar, like a woman I knew. Who was that screaming? I asked them. The skeleton guards chuckled. Why don't you ask your friend? I looked over to see Brad standing there with tears in his eyes. He was shaking his head and saying sorry over and over. What did you do, Brad? It wasn't my fault. I found the game, I opened it up, and I looked at a card. I just wanted to see what it would say. And what did it say? Noel asked. The game's begun. It's all in motion. So find some friends and drink the potions. Find the one the goblin stole before we eat her heart and soul. Get to the finish. Save dear mother, for one does not receive another. We stared at him, still not comprehending what he was telling us. I went upstairs, and my mom was gone. She was just gone. I think that's her screaming. I think maybe goblins took her. When were you going to tell us this? Noel was yelling, grabbing him, and shaking him angrily. You knew this game was evil, and you brought us all into it? The board game was a medieval fantasy-themed one called Dungeons and Darkness. But now it wasn't a board game at all. Now we were inside of it. As totally bat's hit as that sounds, I didn't know this was going to happen. How could I have possibly known? Before we could argue any further, the wall behind us to our right collapsed with an explosion of fire. We all backed up quickly and ducked as stone blocks went flying, landing all about the tunnel with loud crashes and bangs. Suddenly, a figure in a blue robe came flying in through the hole. His body flew through the air and collided with great force against the brick wall on the other side. He landed on the floor and heaved and groaned. That damn dragon, he was muttering as he stood up, dusting himself off. Oh, hello, boys. Long time no see. Hey, it's the wizard. I shouted, happy he was back. He was the first person we'd seen in this strange fantasy world. He'd seemed decent enough, even if he'd been in a bit of a hurry. Oh man, can you help us get out of here? Noel asked. Then help me rescue my mom, Brad added. The wizard wrung his hands and made a few uncertain noises. Then he sighed and picked up his staff. I mean, I can try. I'm not the best wizard. I use a lot of red potions, but I can usually get the job done. He glanced back at the hole in the wall, still smoking, the edges of it burnt and charred. Usually, we continued along with the blue wizard leading the way. The jewel atop his wooden staff glowed with a white light, which proved quite useless in the darkness. The challenges become more difficult in these dungeons, the farther along you get. What stage did you get up to before I joined you? We just came in the entrance. I kind of sweet-talked the guards, complimented them on there. Well, I'm not really sure. They weren't the brightest. Oh, clever boy. Paladins are typically quite charismatic. Well done using it to your advantage. I thought back to my character card when we'd begun to play the game. Charisma had been one of my skills, as well as one-handed combat. I mentioned this to the others. It seemed we had some advantages over our foes here after all, if we used them correctly. 2 flickering torches flanked another door up ahead, and we prepared ourselves for what would come next. The wizard went through first, and the rest of us followed. Immediately, the gate clanged shut with a loud noise behind us, and we found ourselves trapped in an octagonal chamber. Okay, from my experience, the first stage is almost always spiders. There were dozens of them. Huge black spiders the size of dogs and cats. They descended from the ceiling, and I saw one land on the wizard's hand and bite him. Green venom oozed from the wound, and he screamed in pain. Immediately, he fell to the ground, rigid and paralyzed, frozen in the exact way he'd been standing before being bit by the spider. Foam poured out from the side of his mouth, and I heard him gurgling. At least he was still alive. Some help he was going to be, though, I thought to myself. I saw that Tom was already swinging his axe in wide circles, taking out several spiders at a time with his huge weapon. Armor protected him head to toe, and I saw him make short work of the spiders in one corner of the room. Brad, the elf, was picking off others with his bow, shooting them with effortless skill as his character sheet had promised. Each spider he killed fell from its silken thread, oozing fluorescent green blood, which glowed and lit the room in an eerie light. Noel, the barbarian, was swinging his club and crashing it against the wall, crushing giant spiders with ease. One landed on his shoulder, though, and before he could knock it away, it had bitten him, rendering him paralyzed as he twitched on the floor alongside the blue wizard. Only Tom, Brad, and I were left, and another spider suddenly lowered itself down from the ceiling. This spider was much larger than the others had been. Instead of being the size of a cat or a dog, this spider was the size of a small pickup truck. Its giant fangs protruded, and its many eyes looked at us hungrily. Hairy legs skittered on the stone floors as it prepared to attack. Other, smaller spiders came down from the ceiling as well, flanking it on both sides. My heart was pounding with fear as I stared at the massive spider. I knew we wouldn't be able to take it down without everyone's help, and 2 of our party members were currently incapacitated. That was when I remembered the red potions Noel had taken from the shop. He'd thrown them in the backpack, and I ran over and opened it up. I popped off the stopper on the first red potion and poured it into Noel's mouth. Glancing towards the giant spider as it began to move towards us, my hand was trembling with terror as I tossed another red potion to Tom. He poured it into the paralyzed wizard's mouth while Brad continued to fire arrows with lightning quickness at the smaller spiders closing in on us. His quiver seemed to never run out of arrows. The blue wizard sprang to his feet, red liquid staining his teeth and lips as he grinned ear to ear. Whoa, oh man, that red potion's good. Gotta be careful with it, though. Can be quite habit-forming for an adventurer in dungeons above his skill level. He shouted, "Lightning bolt," and a bolt of lightning jumped out from his staff, striking the giant spider dead center. It sizzled and smoked as the buzz of static electricity and the boom of crashing thunder echoed in the small space, momentarily deafening me and causing my ears to ring. With all the spiders dead, the gate ahead rattled up and opened of its own volition, revealing the passageway beyond. "Stage 1, said the wizard. Piece of cake. He walked forward as Noel struggled to his feet. The blue wizard stopped and looked back at us. Before we go any further, there's one question I have to ask of you. We nodded our heads. looking at him solemnly. Do you have any more red potions? Because we are definitely going to need them. We were far underground, in the dark, torchlit tunnels of a dungeon. The blue wizard, who had reluctantly become our guide, led us down one hallway after another. I had no idea how he was deciding which direction to go, but he seemed to know what he was doing, so I didn't question it aloud. Brad did, though. How do you know which way to go? And we'll take another left here. Watch out for that floor tile. If you step on it, poison darts will shoot out from that hole in the wall right there. Sorry, what were you asking? Alright. Well, I usually just head in whichever direction feels right. Wizard's intuition, you know. So you're guessing. How rude. A wizard does not guess. He posits. And I posit that just around this corner will be the next chamber room where we shall face our second challenge. Sure enough, we rounded the bend and there was another wrought iron gate which rattled upwards and allowed us to pass through. Careful of the tripwire. There's a bucket of acid or something waiting above the entryway. I'm fairly certain. If one of you boys sets it off, I'll be quite cross with you. That's good acid after all. Pity to waste it. That's it. One step, two steps. There we go. He guided each of us through the doorway and into a room with an earthen floor and a large dead-looking tree growing at the center. The tree had no light to grow by, and I couldn't understand how it was there. It didn't look particularly healthy. The branches were gnarled, grayish-green and black. It had a diseased-looking trunk, and no leaves could be seen growing upon it. Decapitated heads with rotten flesh were instead sprouting from it in places, like nightmare fruit. At the center of its trunk, staring out at us, were two black pits that resembled eyes and what appeared to be a yawning or silently screaming mouth beneath that. I jumped when the iron gate slammed shut behind us. We were trapped within the terrifying space until we could defeat whatever enemy was there waiting for us, but I saw no one. Are you guys as on edge as I am right now? I feel like something's going to jump out and attack us any second. My guess is undead ghouls, said the wizard. Lots of it. Aim for the head or decapitate at the base of the skull. And don't forget, the most important thing is, suddenly a vine came up probingly from the dirt and wrapped itself around the wizard's leg, pulling him downwards with incredible force. He disappeared into the loose soil a second later, and there was only a concave shape in the dirt and a floppy blue hat where he'd stood a moment before. From beneath our feet, we could hear vague, muffled screaming sounds. I don't think this is a zombie challenge, guys. I'm pretty sure we need to kill that tree before it kills us, Noel said. Roots were coming up from the black earth between our feet, and we ran towards it, weapons in hand. Tom attacked the demon tree first, using his double-sided axe to deal heavy blows to the trunk. Its mouth opened wider, letting out a deafening moan of rage. It began to bleed, black liquid pouring from its side where he attacked it. But still, the monstrous tree was sturdy and strong, and I saw Tom begin to tire quickly and look concerned at the lack of progress he was making. Suddenly, the branches were bending and stretching out towards us from above like giant arms, the twigs closing in around us like greedy fingers. Brad was a sure shot with his bow and arrows once again, and he shot directly at the tree's eyes and mouth, causing it to become distracted with the agony being inflicted upon it. The thing quickly turned its attention to him and sent roots up through the soil at him. His terrified screams rang out through the room as they attempted to grab his legs and pull him under with the wizard. Noel the barbarian jumped up into the tree and began to break larger branches with his huge club, reaching down and smashing at the thing's face with it as well. It seemed like our efforts were futile. I fought as I swung my sword again and again. I was attempting fruitlessly to slice into the iron-hard trunk of the horrible tree, wincing with each jarring impact as the sword's hilt bit into my fingers and blisters began to form. But then something wrapped around my ankle, and I realized I'd been standing still for far too long. The roots and vines had found me from below, and they pulled me downwards with great force. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Frightened as I was after seeing what had just happened to the wizard, I kicked and twisted away as it pulled at my leg. Using my sword, I thrust it down into the dirt, trying to cut the root that had trapped my ankle. A thin, pointed branch suddenly came down from above while I was distracted and snuck in through a crack in my armor. It stabbed into my gut and drove itself deeper into my flesh with its sharp end. It dug and scraped at my insides, and I grit my teeth against the pain. Wailing in agony, I swung my sword blindly at it and managed to sever the branch before it could penetrate any of my vital organs. I pulled out the piece of wood, which was as wide as my thumb and twice as long, beginning to feel woozy when I saw blood pouring out from the hole it left there. There was nothing to bandage it with, so I tried to cover it with my trembling hand. Fear began to consume me then, as blood was spouting like a faucet, leaving my hand warm and stained crimson red. As a child, I passed out at the mere sight of my own blood, and ended up in the hospital once after fainting at school. I'd largely gotten over that irrational fear, but still my vision began to go red around the edges, then a jaundiced, pixelated yellow as I fought off on consciousness. I pressed my hand down firmly against the wound, applying as much pressure as I could. Surprisingly, it felt better almost immediately. Looking down, I saw the hole in my stomach was gone, completely healed over, with smooth new flesh. I examined my hand and saw it was glowing faintly blue. Of course, I'm a paladin. Paladins have healing abilities, I thought to myself. Tom finally began to make some progress on the tree trunk, and I heard it splinter and crack as it was about to tip over. The face on the tree now resembled one of surprised horror, and the gaping mouth opened wider, as if it were screaming as the tree fell. A hand suddenly popped up from the soil, and then another. An arm reached out and attempted with great effort to pull itself up and out of the dirt. Zombies! Noel shouted, getting ready to swing his giant club. A filthy white bearded face popped out, spitting clumps of black soil. Hold on, damn barbarians. So quick to start swinging their clubs when what's needed is a bit of common sense. Whoa, sorry about that, Noel said, and reached down to help the wizard up out of the ground. Nonsense. No harm done. And you defeated that devilish tree. Great work, boys. Quite impressive. The gate at the other end of the room rattled open, and we prepared ourselves to move onwards. By the way, guys, I said, I think I found another ability I've got. I just got stabbed by the tree, and I had a huge hole in my stomach, gushing blood the whole 9 yards. Now, I showed them my stomach, where the flesh was completely healed, with not even a sign of a scar. Yes, typical paladin, healing hands. Only works on minor flesh wounds, of course, but still quite handy. You must have leveled up somewhere along the way. Leveled up? Seriously? Of course. Personally, I'm level A7. I've got quite an arsenal of skills and abilities at this point. We sure hadn't seen much of him yet. I was wishing more and more that Dungeons and Darkness had come with instructions. Apparently, this was an extremely complicated game. Who are you, anyways? Did you play this game and get trapped in it like us? He looked at me and shrugged his shoulders. You know, I don't really remember anymore. It's been a long time. I'm having fun anyways, so no complaints on my end. That was when I realized that this game was more insidious than I thought. It not only trapped the people playing it, but it made them want to stay there. The man was obviously from our world, but had been stuck there so long that he'd forgotten where he came from. Brad, do you remember if there was a wizard character card in that box? I whispered to him. Nah, there definitely wasn't. I remember because I wanted to pick that class, but it wasn't available. I thought that was weird, since what fantasy game doesn't have a wizard or mage character? I think maybe he's the guy who left that box in your basement, Brad. Or maybe his family hid it there under the stairs and sealed it up after he disappeared, I said. Yeah, you could be right, but so what? Big deal if he wants to stay here. I kind of get it. This place is scary, but it's fun too. Like being in a game. I examined Brad with newfound concern. He had a strange look in his eyes. You okay, man? I'm a little worried that this place might have control over people, that it might be changing us like it changed him. His family's probably worried sick about him, and he doesn't even remember who they are anymore. Brad shook his head and looked like himself again for a second. Yeah, you're right. We just need to get to the end, save my mom, and get the hell out of here. After steering around more booby traps and pitfalls, we finally reached the next chamber. The gate opened to reveal a new horror. We stepped inside hesitantly, and there was no question who our foe would be in this room. She stood at the other side, blocking the path to the door. It rattled shut behind her and slammed into the stone floor with a loud clang that echoed throughout the space. The being which stood before us was tall, nearly 7 feet, I guessed. She was pale and extremely thin, all bony elbows and shoulders, and wearing a black funeral dress. Her head was lowered and she stared at the floor. Then her gaze slowly rose to meet us. A mad, grinning face looked up at us. Her eyes were missing, and only shadowy, empty sockets remained, staring out at us. Dry lips cracked as her smile went wider than should have been possible, deforming her face into a Picasso image. "What the hell is that thing?" I asked the wizard. "Honestly," he said, "I have no idea." She began to cackle and raised her hands upwards, and I felt my feet lift off the ground as I hung suspended in the air, floating. Okay, that's a new one. Looking up, I saw spikes jutting out from the ceiling above. They appeared razor sharp, and I had no control as I began to pick up speed. Defying gravity and heading straight towards them, screaming, I put my arms in front of me and braced myself for pain and for the darkness that would surely follow. I looked up and saw an array of sharp spikes waiting for me on the ceiling as I drifted upwards. The tall sorceress below had cast some sort of spell which caused us to disobey the laws of gravity, sending us hurtling towards the ceiling where deadly stalactites were waiting to impale us. Luckily for us, we had a wizard on our side. He cast a spell which created a translucent blue barrier on the ceiling. It blocked our path, and although it hurt when I slammed into it, I could feel it give way slightly, just enough so that it didn't break any bones or cause any real damage. The blue wizard bounced acrobatically off of the barrier and hurtled back downwards like a torpedo straight towards the eyeless sorceress in her black funeral attire. She hissed like a territorial cat as he approached. With his staff held out in front of him, he sent forth a burst of blue energy which struck her and sent her reeling backwards, but only momentarily. She quickly regained her wits and prepared a counterattack. With her hands outstretched, a shimmering blackness began to permeate the space between them. As the blue wizard hurtled through it, seemingly unable to stop himself, it started to solidify. The black shimmering space suddenly turned into dark spider webs which caught him up and disabled him completely. He wound up hanging precariously from the sticky, dark strands, his legs hanging through the twisted loops, looking like a giant fly caught in a web or a Great Dane trying to climb into a hammock. Blast it. Mono-leeching webs. You boys will have to save me. I'm no use while I'm trapped in these vile things. I jumped off from the blue force field, as did Brad, Tom, and Noel. We were sent hurtling by some magic force downwards. Immediately, I regretted the decision as the ground came racing up towards me sickeningly. We were falling from over 100 feet in the air with nothing to slow our descent. The stone floor was coming up towards me, so fast I knew for certain I would die from the impact. Part of me wondered what I'd been thinking, following the wizard's lead as he dropped to the floor with ease. We were not as skilled as him, and now we die for our mistake. But instead of hitting the floor hard and splattering body parts everywhere, our bodies slowed down at the last second, and I wound up landing softly on the ground with the agility of a house cat. We'd managed to avoid the webs cast by the sorceress, and she seemed to be recharging for another attack. Tom raced towards her with his axe held high, a furious red-haired dwarf ready for battle to the death. The wizard screamed from above, warning him that she was a dangerous foe and not to be taken lightly. Brad the elf pulled back the string on his bow and released an arrow, which was aimed squarely at the woman's blank, shadowy eye socket. He timed it perfectly so that just as she was countering the dwarf, left distracted, it hit her true. But still, her counterattack against Tom was fearsome, and I winced as I watched it all happen in a split second. With lightning speed, she created what looked like a long spear-like icicle made of shadows, in the same motion stabbing the dwarf as he brought down his axe, which ended up going wild and missing her completely. She laughed and pulled back the spear, dark blood pouring and oozing from the arrow, which remained lodged in her left eye socket. Blood poured from her mouth, and she began to gather a ball of black lightning in her palms. Brad took a few more shots with his bow. His skilled archery was effortless and done with such speed that before the first arrow had struck its target, The second was already drawn back and ready to fire. I went over to assist Tom and looked up to see her release the ball of lightning at Brad. The blast of energy hit the elf square in the chest, and his bow went flying from his hands as he collapsed to the floor. He lay there unmoving and looked dead. The rise and fall of his chest was indiscernible, and I thought for sure it was a goner. Noel saw this and began to build up into a furious rage. If you know anything about barbarians, you'll know that they're most dangerous when in berserker rage. His face became red, and he gripped the huge club tightly in his hand. Then he began to run forward at the dark sorceress. She saw him coming, and her fear was unmistakable. Although she was powerful, the giant hulking warrior racing towards her in an unbridled fury of rage was impossible to ignore, releasing one blast of dark lightning after another. She attempted to strike him down, the same as she'd done to the elf, but each time he ducked and rolled and evaded her attacks. My healing hands had returned Tom to a state of semi-normalcy, so I left him moaning and groaning where he was, and I ran over to help Brad. I found him lying on the cold stone floor, his face pale and his lips ashen, sputtering and attempting to breathe in ragged fits and bursts. I could tell Brad's wounds were far beyond my skill level. The blue healing glow of my hands did nothing to alleviate his pain, and I looked up to see the blue wizard above us, still trapped in the dark magic spider webs, shaking his head and looking at me helplessly. Then his eyebrows went up, and he spoke. The red potions. He shouted, "Are there any left?" I looked in the bag Brad had been carrying and found there was only one left. Popping off the stopper cork, I poured the red liquid into Brad's mouth, hoping it could revive him before it was too late. Glancing over to Noel, I saw he was engaged in a heated battle with the dark sorceress, and her magical prowess was proving to be no match for his berserker rage. He was now bright red, head to toe, shaking with a furious anger as he swung his massive club about him in a tornado rampage. The sorceress fled from him, but wound up caught in his attacks and was soon laying battered on the ground, her magic sparking and sizzling insufficiently from her fingertips as she died in a pool of black blood. The wizard suddenly fell and landed hard on the stone floor next to us. The spell she cast now worn off and gone. "Are you all right?" I asked after he stood up, brushing himself off. "Just peachy," he said. "Everyone else all accounted for." I looked around and saw somehow we were all indeed alive and well, but we were completely out of red potions now. Not even one left. I shook my head sadly. Well, no matter. There should be only one more chamber left to go now. After that, you'll be free to go back home if you wish. We all looked at him with confusion. "What do you mean by that?" I asked suspiciously. "At the end of every dungeon, you get a choice, a purple potion or an orange one. If you drink the purple one, you stay. If you drink the orange one, you go home. Simple as that. So you've always picked the purple one? You've never wanted to go home after one of these dungeons, even after almost dying like we just did?" He raised his eyebrows and looked perplexed. "Why would I ever want to leave this place? This is everything you could wish for. But I won't judge you if you want to go. You're only level 2 after all. You've barely scratched the surface of what this place has to offer." For some reason, that statement kind of annoyed me. It made me want to prove him wrong. But then I shook it off and told myself not to be silly. This place was a trap. We'd already realized that. I couldn't afford to forget it now. This place wanted to keep us here, to feed off of us. To be honest, I didn't know if that last part was true, but it felt right. Especially when I looked at the long bearded face of the decrepit blue wizard who couldn't even remember who he was anymore. No, we had to get out of there. Even if he wanted to stay, I had to make sure the 4 of us escaped. "Okay, yeah, we'll give it some thought." I lied. "Now, can you help us get through the final chamber of this dungeon so that we can all level up? Get the hell out of here is what I wanted to say, but didn't." "You got it, bud. Let's keep this party moving forward. If you make it to the end, there's always something cool and a gold chest waiting for you there." I called dibs on any legendary magical items, though. Fair enough. The blue wizard continued to lead us through the dungeon down more twisting, turning corridors. Booby traps and pitfalls became more and more frequent, even secret doors opening up here and there to reveal undead ghouls who crept up silently from behind when we thought we were safe, nearly killing us several times. Each time we evaded serious injury and managed to dispatch them, although I did need to use my healing hands a few more times, once even on the blue wizard who missed the trapped floor tile and wound up getting shot with a poison dart. Finally, though, we made it to the final chamber of the dungeon. We enter a room made of skulls. The walls were lined with coffins from floor to ceiling, and the whole place looked like a giant cathedral or monastery. Pews were lined in rows, and we walked past them silently as we made our way towards the front, where I could see someone sitting on a huge throne. There, at the front of the chamber, was a man dressed all in black, a hood covering his face, which was shrouded in shadows. An ornate and ancient-looking pointed obsidian crown sat atop his head. He was tapping his finger impatiently on the armrest as we approached. Lord Necromancer, we meet again, said the wizard, his eyes cold and hard. His demeanor was always jovial and happy, and I've never seen him look like this before. You've met him before? I asked. The wizard's eyes widened with realization and remembrance. They flicked back and forth as if picturing a great many things in his mind's eye. Memories seemed to pass through his vision. Elizabeth, he whispered, I remember now why I never wanted to leave this place, why I always chose to stay. We looked at him, still not comprehending. It was him. We played this game together once upon a time. Elizabeth and I. We both fell into the game, the same as you four. We almost made it through to the end, but then he took her from me. No matter how many times I kill him, it isn't enough. It's never enough. The dark hooded figure on his throne began to laugh, a deep throaty chuckle that echoed throughout the room. Foolish mortals. Once I have taken a soul from you, someone you truly love, never can you escape my domain. I will own you boys forever, like I own him. All I have to do is kill one of you, and that guilt will keep you bound to my dominion, like a sturdy iron chain around your souls. He stood from his throne and clapped his hands twice, loudly. All at once came a sound of cold stone being lifted and moved from 1,000 places at the same time. 1,000 coffins, their lids being slid open from the inside by cold, dead hands. And then, one by one, the dead began to stand, stretching from their slumber, and marched with murder in their eyes towards us. The King Necromancer stood before us, watching as his undead servants closed in and encircled our group. The cold stone chamber echoed around us, with the sounds of hundreds of decaying bare feet treading across the floor, getting closer by the second. What do we do now? I asked the blue wizard, whose lips were still trembling with unbridled rage. He had just revealed that the Necromancer King had murdered his wife during their first encounter when they initially came to this place, to this world within a board game. Now he was trapped here, trying to right the injustice that could never be corrected. Such was the curse of the Necromancer King. He was ensnared in a never-ending quest for revenge. We fight or we die. Maybe a bit of both. With that, he spun and released flame from his staff, ferociously burning up everything around him. The undead ghouls had little remaining flesh hanging from their creaking bones, but what was left melted like candle wax, leaving a screaming skeleton standing before us until they collapsed under their own weight and fell to the floor in shambles. I turned at the sound of movement behind me, and I saw a dozen more of them now within striking distance. With a wide-arcing swing from my sword, I managed to sever the heads of a few closest to me, their thick black blood squirting like geysers into the air. Some of it splattered my face and clothing and tasted coppery and warm on my lips. Tom the dwarf howled a war cry and began to spin like a dervish. He looked like the Tasmanian devil stuck in a food processor full of old meat as he spun and hacked the zombies to pieces all around us. His special attack, the blue wizard explained. The fool is wasting it. Doesn't he realize what he's doing? We each had one special skill. That could be used during the course of our adventure, but only once. By my count, we had only a couple special attacks left. I still had mine, as did Brad, but I realized that Noel had used his Berserker Rage earlier, and that was probably his one-off special skill. It was made into a short work of the Lich Sorceress. The wizard was another wild card. I wasn't sure what tricks he had up those baggy blue sleeves of his, but hoped he had something that could take out the Necromancer King. I had a feeling he was the only one out of the five of us who had a shot at killing the Bastardi. Imagined him summoning a lightning elemental or a fire serpent the size of a school bus. He had to be capable of something. The son of a bitch had done next to nothing of any use aside from helping to guide us there, he claimed. To be extremely powerful, though. Maybe we would see that borne out eventually. Tom was spinning in his whirlwind attack still, while Brad the elf rained down arrows on our foes. He released them so quickly it looked as if we had an army on our side, but I saw the majority of them were missing their targets. Why isn't he hitting them with the arrows? I asked the wizard while slashing at zombies. He's only level 2, same as the rest of you. You're quite fortunate to have survived this long. You must have been rolling in your natural 20s, and your luck has finally caught up to you. He turned and blew a gust of freezing wind from his staff, which turned the nearby zombies into ice cubes. They fell to the stone floor and shattered into a million tiny pieces. Despite the five of us doing everything in our power to defeat the encroaching army of the dead, we were soon backed into a corner and fighting for our lives. Tom screamed as several ghouls dove onto him and began to claw at his armor, pulling it off in places. They tore off his plate mail and helmet before we could get to him, and began to devour his flesh, ripping it from his bones and eating it while it stretched out like warm mozzarella. Within a minute of falling, our former comrade was up again, his eyes now white and blank as he joined the ranks of the dead, trying to rip us to shreds. Thankfully, Noel was taking out more than his fair share of foes. His massive club arced and spun, dealing heavy blows and sending ghouls flying every direction. Just as I thought the tides of battle had begun to turn, Brad fell under an onslaught of the undead. I heard his screams. The elf was up to his feet in moments, his deadly bow now aimed straight towards us. Arrows flew, and thankfully missed my head by inches. Despite our losses, the wizard and I held strong. Noel was the next to fall, though. His wide swinging blows left him open for a counterattack, and the zombies did just that. They piled onto him and began to rip and tear at his flesh with their sharp yellowed teeth. He was soon on the ground, writhing, screaming. My hope began to dissipate, and I realized with a sinking heart that I would die in this place. Fear began to consume me, and my sword started to swing wild, missing targets. The dead began to take precious inches from our small fighting territory as the wizard and I stood back to back, fighting with our last ounces of endurance. Enough. The wizard bellowed. His strong voice rang clear and true and echoed back at us from the high-arching stone ceiling. He began to murmur and chant under his breath. The words were indiscernible, but the power flowing through them was clear as day. Even the unthinking zombies backed away instinctively from the growing energy, which blossomed and built into a towering blue inferno of light. A wave rippled through space and time, and all things as the powerful supernova blast of the wizard was unleashed. Thankfully, I was spared from it. Since I was his ally, every undead creature in the chamber went flying through the air as the explosion boomed and cracked with an echoing blast. The Necromancer King himself went flying backwards from where he stood, crashing into a wall far behind him. Though the impact should have been fatal to anyone, I saw him writhing and moving around on the floor as if to get up again. I turned to the blue wizard and saw him lying on the floor, unmoving. Running over to him, I saw that he was pale, and his lips were turning blue. Blood poured from his mouth, and he coughed and sputtered and groaned in agony. What happened? Are you okay? I asked him. My special attack, the wizard was saying quietly. It was the last resort. The supernova blast is exactly what it sounds like. It is the explosion of a dying star, capable of doing incredible damage, but at great cost. I stood and looked at the Necromancer King, gradually getting to his feet again, and decided then and there to end it. The son of a bitch shouldn't be breathing anymore, I told myself, and I was about to correct that problem. Running down the aisle, my boots crunched across the bones of hundreds of motionless zombies. I heard a battle cry begin to pour out of me instinctively as I raced up the carpeted steps towards the Necromancer, who now stood wobbly before me. He drew a massive obsidian blade as I leapt towards him. My sword thrust out towards his face. I no longer cared if I lived or died, only that this creature was dead and gone. He'd killed everyone I cared about in this place. My sword pierced his faceless hood before he could even take a swing, and I felt nothing as it impaled him. His cloak puddled to the floor instantly, as if it had been worn by a shadow. The Necromancer King was dead. I looked back over my shoulder, and I quickly realized the Blue Wizard would be next to go. I ran over to him, and he looked up at me desperately. "You never used it," he said, a grin playing at the corners of his lips. "Used what?" I asked, confused. "Your special skill. You never used your special skill." I looked down and saw my hands were glowing faintly blue again. "I forgot all about your special skill. I read all the character cards so carefully, but I forgot." He told me, his words barely audible now. It escaped my mind until just now. The Paladin's special skill is called Mass Revive. He'd taken his final breath, and with his eyes still open, he died. His pupils stared out into space, fixed and pinpoint. I realized I hadn't read my character card properly, instead only briefly skimming it. What a thing to miss. I didn't hesitate. The power was ready to be released, and I only had to direct it. So I did. I laid my hands on each of them, and they stood a second later. Noel rose to his feet, human again. Then Tom and Brad followed. Finally, the Blue Wizard stood, looking fully healthy and restored once again. But I wasn't finished. I searched the room with my mind for one more lost ally. Someone from a campaign long before ours. Someone who was long believed irretrievable. There was still a glimmer of humanity left in her, and I sought it out and I brought it back. Elizabeth. She stood, looking human once again, a woman in her 30s by the looks of her, with a worried face and brown hair. Her pale blue eyes searched the room, confused, unsure, and then she saw his face. They ran to each other, the Blue Wizard and his lost love. The two embraced, as the four of us stood watching, happy to see the man finally free of his curse. Suddenly, an enormous golden chest appeared before us. It sprang open, and its glowing contents revealed armor and weaponry that looked powerful and ornate. Brad reached his hand in to grab a dagger that looked especially powerful and glowed red with a magical aura. I slapped his hand and looked him sternly in the eye. "No touching. Remember, this place wants to keep us here. We're only interested in these." I pulled out a pair of potions and beakers, one purple and one orange. "Which did you say will take us home?" I asked the wizard. "Purple, you stay put. Orange gets you out." I took the cork out from the orange vial and offered to be the guinea pig. The wizard held the bottle so it wouldn't fall to the floor and break if I suddenly disappeared. Bringing the potion to my lips, I prepared myself to be transported back to Earth, back to reality. "Hang on," Brad said. "What? How do you know the orange one takes you home? You never tried it." He was looking suspiciously at the Blue Wizard who was standing there with his arm around his long-lost wife's shoulder. "Well, I suppose I just assumed. The first time I tried one randomly, and it kept me here, so I figured the other one would get me back home again." Problem. Brad was eyeing both vials and held them up in the dim light. "You said this place wants to keep us here, right? So why would they offer us a way out? I'll bet they both keep you stuck here, and probably erase a bit of your memory every time as well. So what do you propose?" I asked. "I say we wait." We all stared at him, confused. "And what's that gonna achieve? Remember what got us here in the first place? Drinking those damn Coca-Cola potions, right? So maybe this is the same as if you've had a bit too much to drink. You just got to sleep it off and let the booze get out of your system. The last thing you should do is chug some more poison, though." Elizabeth spoke up and stunned us all by concurring. "The Necromancer King kept feeding me potions once a day. I think those vile things are tricks designed to keep us here. I can't help but feel the same way. That orange potion is likely a trap. Everything in this place is toxic and evil. The red potions. I kept drinking them constantly to keep my health level up," said the wizard, his eyes widening. "I never thought they were anything but healing potions. Maybe I was wrong. I suppose there's no harm in waiting here for a while just to see what happens." The six of us agreed to remain in the Necromancer's chamber and wait for the potions that got us there to work their way out of our systems. It took a long time for anything to happen, but eventually the oddness began. The giant gray stones which made up the necromancer's chamber began to vanish one by one, leaving only blackness behind. Piece by piece, bit by bit, the entire world began to evaporate around us until finally we were left in a black void. And I realized immediately that we were not alone. You think yourselves clever. I was too afraid to answer, too afraid to move. The thing, whatever it was huge, massive beyond my comprehension. It surrounded us and enveloped us in the darkness, and I began to shiver from the cold. There was no light in this bitter place. I am the dungeon master. None have escaped me before now, and I will not give up so easily on you six. I will continue to play my games with you. I will be in your dreams and in your nightmares, and you will feel pain in those places. The same as you did here, none can win against me, and you are no exception. And with that, the light began to return to the world, and I saw we were in a convenience store once again, only now with a man and a woman who I did not recognize standing there with us. Elizabeth, I presume. She shook my hand, and I looked at the man standing beside her. I never did learn your real name, I said, nor am I yours. We shook hands and smiled, looking each other in the eyes. You're the Blue Wizard, and you're the Paladin, he responded. Pleasure to make your acquaintance. Hey, what the hell is this coin doing superglued to the floor? What's this? You having a party back there behind the damn cash register? Noel's boss was standing up from where he'd been kneeling down on the floor, trying to pick up the coin that had been glued there as a prank, the memory of which felt long ago and ancient to me now. Luckily, people in our town are pretty honest, because nobody robbed the place in the late night hours that we were gone, although time seemed to work differently in the dungeon and stretched out much longer. We'd still been gone long enough that there was a tiny little pile of bills and chains on the counter where some kind soul had put up a sign saying honor system, which Noel hastily threw in the trash. The five of us ran out of there pretty quickly, and we went our separate ways. Vowing to keep in touch with the Blue Wizard and Elizabeth, we left Noel behind to get yelled at by his boss. Lying in bed that night, with only a few hours remaining until morning, I had trouble falling asleep. I kept thinking about what the dungeon master had said in the darkness, how we could never escape him or that place. Not really. I felt like he was right, and of course he was. It's been many years since that first night. Every time I drift off to sleep, I wake up back in that dungeon, just like that bastard promised. Every night, I have the same dream. I'm back down there, in those winding, twisting tunnels. Only now, I don't have my friends with me, and there's no Blue Wizard to guide me. The horrors I have witnessed and the agony I have felt in the dungeons of my dreams, I wish on no one. What I didn't expect, though, was for Brad to decide to go back in to play once again. I think because he never did find his mother, the game stole her and lured him in with her, but never returned her to him. He disappeared last week, and even though I loathe the thought of going back there, I feel like we owe it to him, that we have to at least try to save him. If you don't hear from me again, don't come looking for me. That's exactly what he wants. More victims. The dungeon master always wins.